The air is heavy when you wake. It clings to your skin like a damp cloth, carrying the sour trace of last night's spilled wine and the faint perfume of burned-out myrrh. Outside, a cart rattles over the uneven stones of Pompeii's narrow street, iron-rimmed wheels striking the silence like a drumbeat. Somewhere nearby a dog barks once, then fades into the restless hum of a city that never truly sleeps. You are lying in a room so small you could touch both walls without stretching, a room where the plaster is cracked and the straw mattress scratches your legs. It is not a senator's villa, not the chamber of a gladiator, not the mosaic-covered hall of a wealthy merchant. It is the lupanar, the wolf's den. And you, like me, are no hero of marble or bronze. You are something Rome pretends not to see. You are a lupa. The word itself is a curse and a badge, a slur whispered on the lips of the pious, and yet a title bound with survival's pride. They call us wolves because we haunt the night, because our voices lure men as surely as hunger drives beasts into the fold. But in truth, we are neither wolves nor saints. We are shadows, necessary and despised, used and forgotten. We live coin by coin, body by body, hidden in the alleys of Rome's great empire, our names etched not in scrolls or triumphal arches, but in the graffiti scrawled on stone. And yet, here you are, leaning closer to hear this story. Not for glory, not for gold. You've heard enough of emperors and generals, of battles and marble temples. No, tonight you have come for the murmur behind the closed door, for the quiet breath of a woman who lives between survival and silence. If you are listening now, you are part of this. From the far-flung corners of this modern empire watching tonight, wherever your bed or chair might be, you are here in the lupanar with me. You are in the room that reeks of sweat and smoke. You are listening to a life rarely spoken, a truth left out of the history scrolls. What is that life? It is dangerous, precarious, and unseen. A candle flame in the draft of empire, flickering against the torchlight of Rome. A shadow cast by power's glow, visible to all, but known by none. We are present at the city's heart, and yet we vanish in its telling. Men walk past our doors without a glance, then stumble through them at night, leaving coins and silence in their wake. The risk is not only shame, but also violence, for behind every transaction is the possibility of cruelty. Behind every whisper of pleasure, the sharp edge of fear. So let the modern world fade. Let the glow of your lamp, the hum of your street, the distractions of today slip away. Close your eyes if you wish, and let the room around you dissolve into plaster and shadow. You are in Pompeii now. The year is carved in stone, though you will not read it. The sun has not yet risen, but its pale promise creeps closer. And here, in this cramped cell, where the ceiling leaks and the straw stinks, a woman stirs. Her name is Livia. She opens her eyes to another day, and survival begins again. Livia stirs, her body heavy as if the night's weight still presses her into the straw. The mattress beneath her is flattened to the hardness of the floor, the stalk scratching her skin through the thin sheet. She shifts, wincing as her muscles protest, every ache reminding her of last night's parade of strangers. Their touches still cling to her skin in memory, a film she cannot wash away. The air is stale, sour with the smell of oil lamps that burned too long, mixed with the salt of sweat and the lingering musk of men who came and went without faces. She lies still for a moment, eyes half open, letting her chest rise and fall in a rhythm that is neither restful nor resigned. Another day waits, and she must meet it. In the atrium, she hears the sharp clatter of coins. The sound slices through the silence of the morning, harsh and metallic, followed by the rasp of an older woman's voice. Drusilla, always up before the others, always counting, her fingers nimble over the small pile of bronze and silver. The scowl in her tone is as audible as her tally. Each coin carries weight. How many were earned? How many were owed? How many would vanish into the hands of the owner before sunrise gave way to heat? To Livia, the sound is both anchor and reminder. This is what their nights become, reduced to metal, stacked and divided. The walls around her do not soften the truth. Painted figures stare down in silent mockery, frozen in acts that men come here to buy. Once the colors were bold, reds that glowed like fire, blues that promised cool escape. Now they are faded, chipped, and dull, their vibrancy drained by time and smoke, like the women who live in their shadows. They are art and advertisement both, a painted menu no one bothers to read anymore. She glances at them briefly, her eyes tired of the poses, tired of the illusion of choice they represent. Her feet brush the ground, rough stone cool beneath her soles. As she shifts to stand, movement flickers in the corner of her eye. A tiny lizard darts from under her cot, pausing to blink, as if daring her to chase it. She doesn't. Instead, she murmurs, half a smile tugging at her lips despite the heaviness of her body. "Morning, Titus." The name stuck weeks ago, after a client who argued endlessly over a single coin. The lizard became a quiet companion, a reminder that even in this place, life scurries on, small and stubborn. "Another day, Livia," she whispers to herself, rubbing her temples as if she could press the exhaustion out of her skull. "Keep moving, or the city will bury you." The words hang in the dimness like a prayer no god would answer, but she clings to them anyway. Reaching for the taper by her bedside, she tilts it toward the last trembling flame of the torch set in the wall. The fire catches, weak but alive, and for a heartbeat she feels a flicker of defiance, light against darkness, choice against silence. She carries it carefully, cupping her hand around the flame as she makes her way toward the basin at the end of the corridor. Water waits there, cold, cloudy, but enough to wash the night from her skin. The hallway stretches ahead, narrow and echoing with faint sounds of the city beginning to stir outside. Somewhere a rooster crows. Somewhere a merchant drags open the shutters of his stall. Livia steps forward, her taper guiding her path. The world beyond is waking, and so must she. The water in the shallow basin is lukewarm, clouded with the dust of too many hands. Livia leans over it, cupping her palms and splashing her face, blinking hard as the droplets sting her tired eyes. The ritual is not one of luxury, but of survival, of trying to scrub away the sweat and fingerprints of men who are already forgotten. She pours a trickle of olive oil into her palm, the scent cut with a few sprigs of dried lavender scavenged from a merchant's cart weeks ago. She rubs the mixture across her arms and chest, working the oil into her skin, before scraping it off with a dull strigil. The tool grates softly, pulling away the oil along with yesterday's grime, leaving faint red lines that vanish almost as soon as they appear. Her movements are mechanical, each scrape practiced, her mind elsewhere, unwilling to linger on the ache in her shoulders or the shadows under her eyes. From down the hall comes the sharp crack of voices. Claudia, her tone shrill with indignation, spits words at Livia, who fires them back with equal heat. The subject is familiar, a client who drank more than he could pay for, slipping out with a grin and an empty purse. The fight swells and recedes like waves, filling the stone corridor with its bitterness. Livia pauses, strigil in hand, listening with the faintest smirk tugging at her lips. The same disputes rise every morning, and every morning they end with the same sour acceptance that nothing will change. The lupanar eats coins quickly and swallows complaints even faster. She does not join in. She has no breath to waste on men who leave debts behind. Her concern is with those who pay and pay again. She reaches for her small comb, its teeth uneven from years of use, and drags it through her tangled hair. Each stroke tugs sharply, pulling free strands that fall onto the damp floor. She pins the remaining locks back with bone pins, worn smooth by her fingers, pushing them into place with a kind of resignation. From a clay dish she lifts a bit of ochre, rubbing it into her cheeks until a faint flush emerges, less beauty than mask. She does not aim for the elegance of a Matrona, the noble wives she sometimes glimpses drifting through Pompeii's streets in silken stolas. Their polish is unattainable, their finery a world away. Livia's paint is armor, a sign to clients that she is prepared to play her part, no matter how tired her eyes may be. There is no soap in this place, only the oil and grit that stand in for cleanliness. For her teeth, she uses charcoal dust, bitter and grainy, the ash of yesterday's fires rubbed against her gums until her tongue is blackened. It is not pleasant, but it strips away the sourness of wine and the traces of stale breath left by others. She spits into the basin, rinses quickly, and straightens her back. Each part of this routine is both humiliation and defiance. She cannot erase what she is forced to endure, but she can prepare herself to endure it again, and in that small act lies a stubborn pride. "Venus, keep the brutes away today," she mutters under her breath, half prayer, half curse. "I'll settle for coins over curses." Her voice is low, but it lingers in the cramped air as if the walls themselves have grown used to such bargains whispered at dawn. She lifts her taper, touches it to a flame sputtering from the dying torch, and watches it catch. The glow softens her face for an instant, painting her features in gold. She blows out a breath, steadying herself, and gathers her thin shawl around her shoulders. The sounds of the city are stirring now, footsteps and vendors' calls drifting faintly from outside the stone walls. The fight between Claudia and Livia has already dimmed to mutters, swallowed by routine. Livia steps away from the basin, the oil's faint scent clinging to her skin. She knows her day will bring the same parade of men, the same bargains, the same weary exchanges. But first comes the shrine, the tiny alcove at the end of the hall where Venus waits in chipped marble, eternally smiling. Livia moves toward it, taper in hand, her stride steady. In this small corner, before the weight of the day bears down, she will offer her coin and her whisper, and hope that the goddess listens. The narrow corridor ends in a shallow alcove, where a soot-stained shrine waits, its air heavy with the smoke of countless tapers. The clay statue of Venus is cracked at the hip, the faint trace of a smile still painted on her lips, despite the years of neglect. Around her feet lie shriveled flower petals, dried into paper-thin curls, and the stubs of candles long since burned down to nothing. Someone has carved prayers into the base, rough scratches left by hands desperate for notice, words half-faded, but still reaching. The goddess sits above them all, her chipped surface catching the faint glow of a wavering flame. Livia kneels, the stone floor cold through the thin fabric of her shift. She lowers her taper, lighting it from the smoldering wick already leaning in its holder, and sets it carefully at the statue's feet. The flicker adds a brief warmth to the alcove, illuminating her face in amber light. She presses her palms together, the gesture automatic, then lets them fall open again as though even her body doubts its usefulness. "Venus," she murmurs, voice quiet but steady. "You know my trade. Spare me the ones who think they own me." Her words spill out like the oil she poured that morning, a mixture of reverence and resignation. She asks for safety from the fists and sudden rage of men who pay for pleasure but deliver cruelty instead. She asks for barrenness, for her body to remain empty no matter how many times it is claimed, because a child would be a chain she cannot afford. And she asks, almost as an afterthought, for coins, enough to buy bread that will not be stale, or olives not already bruised. They are small requests, but even as she speaks them, her lips twist faintly, as though mocking her own hope. The smell of burned honey clings to the air, left behind by another's offering. It mixes with the musk of the lupanar itself, the sweat that seeps into the stones, the faded perfume trapped in its walls. Livia inhales the blend and lets it sit in her chest, trying to believe that the goddess notices such gestures. Venus, after all, is said to see the unseen, to cradle those ignored by others. A goddess of beauty, yes, but also of survival, of bargains whispered in the dark. She leans forward, fingers brushing the statue's base, rough beneath her touch. The scratches of old prayers catch against her skin. "Do you keep count?" she asks softly, almost smiling. "How many of us beg you to listen? How many of us walk away the same?" There is no answer, only the sputter of the taper and the faint creak of the wooden beams above her head. Still, the act grounds her. The words said, the flame offered, the hope, however faint, folded into the morning. She straightens, lifting her chin, the skeptical edge in her expression softening into something calmer. The prayer may not bring miracles, but it has steadied her pulse. That is enough. A door groans open somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing down the hall. Heavy footsteps follow, slow and deliberate, the rhythm of business resuming. Livia exhales, rises to her feet, and pulls her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The taper's flame bends in the draft as she steps away from the alcove, the goddess receding into shadow behind her. The first client has come, and the day is already beginning. The door closes behind her with a dull thud, and the sound of those footsteps grows louder until the man steps into view. He carries the scent of the sea with him, sharp and invasive, like a net freshly hauled from the shore. His cloak is heavy with damp, its hem darkened from the spray of salt water. He does not look at her, not fully. His gaze flickers past her face and onto the ground, as if eye contact itself might betray him. His hands, thick and cracked from years of hauling fish, tremble slightly as he fumbles with the clasp of his cloak. Salt clings to his nails, etched into the skin like permanent scars. Livia does not ask him questions. She does not need to. She has seen enough men like him, weathered, reeking of brine, ashamed even as they reach for what they came to buy. She steps aside, gesturing toward her chamber, her voice low and steady. This way. Her tone carries no invitation, no warmth, only the mechanical cadence of routine. The room itself offers little comfort. The walls are damp with a chill that never quite lifts, the faint trace of mold clinging to the corners. The mattress is thin, the sheets coarse and already carrying the musk of too many nights before. Livia moves without hesitation, guiding him in as if she were leading a horse into its stall. The man sheds his cloak quickly, avoiding the way it splashes against the floor. His silence thickens the air, louder than words could ever be. When his rough hands reach for her, Livia steadies herself. She allows the practiced rhythm to take over, a script she has repeated countless times. Her body responds with motions rehearsed to perfection. The small shift of hips, the faint arch of her back. At one point, she forces a sound from her throat, a moan crafted not from pleasure but from necessity, another tool in her arsenal. The man breathes heavily, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. He never speaks. His shame seems to press down on him, holding him silent, as if words might shatter the fragile distance he clings to. It is over quickly, as she expected. He pulls away with a grunt, already reaching for his cloak as though eager to retreat into its folds. From his pocket, he draws 2 bronze coins, letting them fall onto the edge of the bed. The sound is sharp, metallic, and far too small. They clatter together, rolling a little before settling, their dull gleam mocking her effort. Barely enough for bread, let alone oil or wine. He does not wait for her reaction. With his eyes still averted, he slips out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. Livia stares at the coins, her jaw tightening. They are ordinary pieces, plain and unremarkable, but she thinks of others she has seen. Bronze discs etched with obscene figures, spintry passed hand to hand like boasts, or perhaps used as payment. Men treasure such tokens, yet here she is, given only the bare minimum, expected to smile and accept it. She scoops the coins into her palm, the metal cold against her skin, and mutters under her breath, 2 coins? Mercury, you're laughing at me today. She tucks them away in the small wooden box hidden beneath her cot, adding to the meager collection already there. It rattles when she closes it, the sound thin and unsatisfying. She exhales, smoothing the sheets with a swift, efficient motion, erasing the evidence of the man who just left. There is no time to dwell on him, or on the insult of his payment. Pulling her shawl around her shoulders, she steps back into the hallway. The murmur of voices is already rising, the shuffle of more footsteps, the familiar swell of the morning rush. She squares her shoulders, preparing herself for the next man, the next exchange, the next set of coins that may or may not be worth the effort. The quiet left behind by the fishmonger does not last. Before the chill of the damp sheets fades, The hallway swells with new footsteps, heavier, more hurried. Dock workers, their tunics stained with pitch and salt, push through the narrow doorway, jostling past one another with the impatience of men already late for their morning labor. Messengers with ink-stained fingers, their sandals slapping against the stone, hover restlessly as if timing themselves against the rising sun. They come not to linger, but to spend themselves quickly, seeking release before the clang of hammers and the cry of overseers drag them back to work. The lupanar hums like a hive. Doors open and close in uneven rhythm, the shuffle of feet blending with muffled grunts, half-voiced laughter, the creak of wooden frames. Livia steps into this flow as though into a current, her body adjusting without hesitation. Each man is guided in with the same detached nod, her hands steady as she directs them to her small chamber, her voice clipped, efficient. There is no intimacy in her tone, only instruction. Where to stand, how to move, when to pay. The exchanges blur together until they feel less like encounters and more like a set of repetitive gestures, the same sequence enacted again and again. Coins fall into her palm, sometimes copper, sometimes bronze, the clink and weight the only measure of success. She does not bother with smiles or eye contact. Most men avoid her gaze anyway, too eager to be done. One drops his belt in such a hurry that it tangles around his ankles, and he curses under his breath while she waits with arms folded. Another asks, sheepishly, to try a pose he had seen scratched into one of the frescoes along the wall. He attempts it, twisting awkwardly, his knee slipping against the straw mattress until he collapses in an undignified heap. For a brief moment, Livia feels the corner of her mouth twitch. She bites back a laugh, not out of cruelty, but because the absurdity threatens to pierce the rhythm she must maintain. "Pick a pose," she mutters dryly as he scrambles up, "but don't expect miracles." The pace quickens with every passing moment. The air grows thick with sweat, oil, and the faint tang of cheap wine lingering from last night's revelry. This is the hour when Rome itself seems to quicken, when coin and desire find their sharpest edge. The brothel mirrors the city's pulse, men flooding in, emptying their purses and bodies in equal haste, then spilling back out into the streets. For Livia, it is survival stripped of ornament, a dance performed with weary precision. By the time she slips into the hallway for a breath, her stomach knots with hunger. She plucks a fig from a tray left unattended near the entrance, its skin soft and beginning to split. The sweetness bursts on her tongue, sharp against the dull taste of the morning's labor. As she chews, she catches the voices of two women nearby, their tones lowered but not enough to escape her ear. They trade gossip about methods to avoid unwanted children, herbs boiled in secret, amulets tied around the waist, whispered prayers that promise more than they deliver. Livia listens without comment, the fig pit rolling against her teeth. She swallows, brushing her fingers clean against her shawl, and feels a flicker of something. Hope, or at least the fragile thought that perhaps there are ways to shape her fate more than chance allows. She lingers on the thought only a moment before another door creaks open, reminding her the rush is far from over. The atrium is dim, its plastered walls streaked with soot where lamps have smoked too long. A brazier burns faintly, hardly warming the stone floor. Livia sinks down onto a worn bench, a half-eaten fig still sticky in her hand. Beside her, Livia stretches her legs with a groan, tugging her tunic higher to cool herself in the stale air. Claudia, always the talkative one, leans forward with conspiratorial energy, her eyes darting toward the corridor, as if the very walls might judge her words. "Listen," Claudia begins, lowering her voice though not enough to muffle her delight in shocking. "You take a strip of linen, soak it in wine, slip it inside before, well, you know. It clouds the seed, keeps it wandering." She makes a little swirling motion with her finger, to laughter and groans. Livia snorts, pulling the fig pit from Livia's hand and tossing it aside. "Linen works if you believe in miracles. Better chance praying to Mercury after he spilled his cup." Livia wipes her sticky fingers on her thigh, arching a brow. "I'd rather trust a drunk's aim than a rag dipped in sour wine." Her tone is light, but a thread of unease winds through it. The talk circles on, each woman offering another remedy learned from some lover's whisper or midwife's muttering. Vinegar-soaked cloth, pomegranate rind ground into powder, amulets tied tight around the waist. Livia mentions pennyroyal, though none can agree if it's boiled as tea or burned as incense. And then the name that carries a hush, silphium, a golden cure-all, they say, a plant prized above coin, rare enough that only senators' wives might taste it. The word itself feels dangerous, as though spoken too loudly it might vanish into myth altogether. They say it grows only where the sun favors it, Claudia muses, her voice half wonder, half despair. Worth its weight in silver. And when was the last time you saw silver in these halls? Livia mutters, earning another ripple of laughter that rings too hollow to be true. Beneath the banter, anxiety presses close. Livia's gaze drifts across the atrium to the far corner, where a young worker, scarcely more than a girl, shifts uneasily against the wall. Her tunic sags loose, but not loose enough to hide the curve forming beneath. She holds her arms crossed as though to shield herself from their notice. Livia looks away quickly, the sight heavy with unspoken warning. Pregnancy in this place is not miracle but misfortune. Another mouth, another body marked, another woman vanishing quietly when she can no longer sell the illusion of youth. The laughter falters for a beat, as if each woman has caught the same glimpse, felt the same chill. Claudia clears her throat, reaching again for bravado. Well, better vinegar than nothing. Better wine than hope alone. Hope, Livia replies flatly, doesn't pay the midwife. The brazier pops, sending up a hiss of smoke that makes their eyes water. For a moment, the air feels thick with more than musk and ash. It is heavy with their collective dread, bound together by fear disguised as humor. These scraps of advice, half superstition and half science, are all that keep them from feeling utterly powerless. Then, 3 sharp knocks against the outer door. The women start, conversation snapping shut like clams disturbed in shallow water. A silence spreads, heavier than before, until footsteps echo in the entryway. The sound is unmistakable, the steady, deliberate tread of the watchman, whose presence rarely bodes well. Livia mutters under her breath, "Coin for silence, as always." Livia straightens, brushing fig juice from her lips, the warmth of camaraderie cooling into tension. Whatever shield their gossip had provided is gone. Rome's demands press not only from within, but now from without, and the morning's fragile laughter dies as the watchman's shadow falls across the threshold. The knock had hardly faded when the door scraped open. The figure filling the threshold was familiar, broad shoulders wrapped in the leather straps of the vigils, helmet tucked under one arm, his mouth bent into a smile that had no warmth. He leaned casually against the doorframe, as though entering a tavern rather than a brothel. "For protection," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. The words were less request than ritual, repeated week after week like a prayer recited by rote. His eyes scanned the room, lingering too long on the women, their bare arms and tunics, before finally settling on the small wooden coffer behind the bench. Drusilla rose without a word. Her hair, hastily bound, gleamed with oil in the flicker of the brazier. She moved to the locked box, fingers steady as she drew the key from a cord around her neck. Each motion carried the sharp grace of someone long accustomed to humiliation. Efficient, unhesitating but never submissive. She flipped the lid, plucked out a few coins, and dropped them into the watchman's waiting palm. His smile widened, the clink of bronze ringing louder than it should. "You see, Rome looks after her own." The words curdled in the air. Livia watched from her bench, jaw tight, resisting the urge to spit. Protection. From thieves, perhaps, but mostly from himself. From men like him who circled the lupanar like vultures, feeding not on bodies, but on the fragile illusion of legality. She lowered her voice, murmuring so only the women near her could hear. "From you, maybe?" Livia smirked at the remark, but quickly masked it behind her hand. No one dared let the watchman catch the shape of defiance. Drusilla closed the box with a sharp snap, locking it again before slipping the cord back around her neck. Her face betrayed nothing, no flare of temper, no flash of defeat. Only the cool, sculpted blankness of stone, polished smooth by years of the same ritual. Yet Livia caught it, the tiniest twitch in the corner of her mouth, the narrowing of her eyes as she handed over coin earned through sweat and bruises. A mask, yes, but one stretched thin over contempt. The watchman jingled the coins in his fist before tucking them away. "You're wise women," he said, stepping back toward the street. "Keep paying, and Rome will keep you safe." Safe. The word echoed like a jest. Safe from hunger, perhaps, but never from ruin. Safe from the law, but not from the law's enforcers. Rome's books balanced on their backs, their names scrawled in registers where shame and coin were measured with the same ink. Livia imagined the tally. Every kiss, every coupling, each transaction boiled down to a number in some official ledger. A tax not of protection, but of survival. When the door finally closed, the brazier hissed as if exhaling relief. The women dispersed in silence, each carrying her own weight of bitterness. Livia rose, brushing crumbs of fig skin from her lap. She lingered for a moment, staring at the door where the watchman had stood. Her fists clenched once, then loosened, no sense fighting what could not be fought. She turned down the corridor, her sandals whispering against the stone. Her room waited, dim and airless but familiar. She crossed the threshold and let the curtain fall behind her, already bracing herself for the midday rush. The next round of men, the next round of coins, the next round of survival. By midday, the lupanar throbbed like a wounded beast, its walls pulsing with footsteps, groans, and the metallic jingle of coin. The heat pressed down from the open courtyard above, mingling with the musk of sweat and oil. The air felt thick, like something to be chewed rather than breathed. Laborers arrived first, dockhands with salt clinging to their arms, builders whose skin carried the dust of stone. They shoved coins into palms without lingering, eager to spend their hunger on flesh before returning to the day's grind. Behind them came the soldiers, loud and brash, their bronze buckles clattering as they bargained for time like merchants haggling over grain. To Livia, their faces blurred into one, sweat, stubble, and the faint stink of leather. Each encounter bled into the next until the rhythm became mechanical. Door, bed, coin, repeat. By the third soldier, her thighs burned with the dull ache of repetition. Her voice rasped when she forced the occasional pleasantry, though she quickly learned silence was more efficient. They didn't come for conversation, they came for release, and release required no words. Still, absurdity cut through the monotony. One fisherman, still reeking of brine, shuffled in with a grin and produced not coin, but a glistening carp wrapped in linen. "For you," he said proudly, placing it on the bench as though offering treasure. Livia stared at the fish, then at him. She wiped a bead of sweat from her temple and let sarcasm sharpen her tongue. "Fish? Try bread next time, genius. At least it won't rot before I can spend it." The man blinked, embarrassed, before fumbling a few proper coins from his pouch. Vibia, hearing the exchange from the next room, stifled a laugh that broke the tension like glass shattering. But even humor could not soften the toll. Each body pressed upon her left its mark. A bruise, a scrape, a muscle stretched past endurance. By midday, the ache climbed her back, threading into her shoulders until every movement felt weighted. Sweat slicked her skin, salt stinging her eyes. She drank water when she could, but the jug emptied faster than Drusilla refilled it. Beyond the walls, Rome's pulse carried on. From the street, echoes of the nearby bathhouse drifted through the narrow window. Men laughing, water sloshing, voices raised in bawdy songs. The brothel lived in their shadow, tethered to that rhythm of indulgence. Where one set of appetites was sated, another began. Vice flowed like wine, unending, unashamed. Inside, the frescoes stared down at her. the painted gods and lovers locked in eternal, impossible embraces. One figure, twisted so unnaturally that no mortal body could replicate it, caught her attention mid-act. Livia broke into laughter, sharp and sudden, startling the soldier atop her. "What's funny?" he grunted, breath heavy. She shook her head, still chuckling. "That pose on the wall? Even a contortionist would snap in two. And you men think you're inventive." The soldier frowned, not understanding, but the laughter lingered for her, sweet as stolen honey. For a heartbeat, the drudgery loosened its grip. Yet the tide pressed on. Coins piled in the bowl beside her bed, dull bronze tokens of exhaustion. She scooped them absent-mindedly, her fingers sticky with sweat, her mind half floating above her body. When the last client of the hour stumbled out, she collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving, her skin burning. She tugged a rag across her face, wiping away the sheen of labor. For once, the silence of the room was almost holy. Then, from the atrium, raised voices broke through, an argument swelling, sharp and cutting. Livia straightened, pressing her ear to the curtain. The respite was gone. Rome, it seemed, allowed no true rest. The silence after the midday rush did not last. From the far corner of the lupanar, a sound cracked the stillness, a cough, dry and ragged, tearing through the quiet like a knife through cloth. It came again, deeper this time, rattling in the chest of whoever hid behind that curtain. The rhythm was unnatural, a reminder not of exhaustion but of something festering. The women in the atrium stiffened. They exchanged quick glances, their laughter at some bawdy tale cut short. Livia froze where she sat, her skin prickling. That corner room carried a history no one spoke of openly, a place whispered about in the dead of night. Some said it was cursed, others said it was merely unlucky. But all agreed, the cough that started there never seemed to end. Livia pulled her shift tighter and forced herself to stand. She crossed the walkway quickly, her sandals slapping the tiles, her eyes fixed forward. She did not slow, did not peek past the hanging cloth of the doorway. To look inside would be to invite knowledge she did not want. Knowledge of who lay within, how hollow their eyes had become, how pale their skin stretched over sharp bones. She kept her gaze on the far wall instead, counting her steps until she was safely beyond. Still the sound followed her, lodging itself in her ears. With each rasping hack, memories stirred. She remembered Flavia. Flavia, with her wild red hair and laugh that carried through the brothel louder than any client's shout. Flavia, who once shared her bread and whispered jokes about the fresco's painted gods. And then the cough came for her. First light, then heavier, until Flavia could no longer take clients. She was moved to that very corner room, shrouded in shadow. One morning, her bed lay empty, her few possessions swept away. No one said where she had gone, but Livia knew. The lupanar devoured its own, and Rome had no ledger for the lost. Not again, Livia whispered under her breath. Not another name to forget. Rome did not care. For all its marble temples and bustling forums, for all its laws and censuses, the city turned blind eyes to those who slipped quietly into the earth. Prostitutes had no physician, no temple offering remedies for their ills. Illness was met not with treatment, but with silence, as though invisibility could contain contagion. Rome's indifference was vast, stretching wider than its empire, swallowing the unseen whole. The cough rattled again, and Livia's stomach tightened. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, fighting the urge to run. Fear was a dangerous indulgence. Better to smother it, to turn away, to let gossip and chatter fill the void where dread might grow. So she drifted back to the atrium, where Livia and Drusilla had already taken up another story. Their voices rose and fell in playful tones, trading rumors of a senator's son caught in scandal, of a matron seen slipping into the subura in disguise. Livia forced herself to laugh at the right moments, her smile stiff at first, then looser as the warmth of familiar voices dulled her thoughts. But beneath the noise, she still heard it. The cough, faint yet persistent, echoing in her skull. And with it, the knowledge that sooner or later another bed would lie empty. The atrium smelled of stale wine and yesterday's bread, but for the women gathered there, it was a refuge of sorts. Livia slid onto the low bench beside Drusilla and Vibia, grateful for the brief reprieve from clients and the shadow that coughed behind the curtain. Drusilla tore a hunk of coarse bread, its crust too hard to chew without effort, and passed it around. They ate in turns, washing the mouthfuls down with watered wine, pretending it was a feast instead of scraps. Gossip, as always, filled the silence. Vibia, quick-tongued and sharp-eyed, began her tale. "You should have seen him," she said between bites. "The fool looked me up and down and said I was like bread dough, soft and ready to be kneaded. Bread dough! I nearly asked if he wanted me baked in his oven, too." Drusilla laughed, choking on her wine. "Did you knead him back?" "I nearly threw flour at him," Vibia retorted, and the three of them burst into laughter that echoed down the tiled corridor. Livia smirked, shaking her head. "Better than my silent grunter. No words, no moans, just staring. I swear I thought he was dead halfway through. I nudged him to check if he was breathing." The laughter grew louder, rising to a pitch too bright, too strained. It rang like the clatter of cymbals meant to drown out something else. And for Livia, that something else was still there. The dry, hacking cough she had heard only minutes before. Even as she laughed, she felt the sound rattle inside her chest, as though memory alone could infect her. She said nothing. They all said nothing. No one named the sound from the corner room, because to speak of it would give it weight, reality. Instead, they pressed harder into gossip, wrapping themselves in it like a shield. Drusilla leaned forward conspiratorially. "Did you hear about the brothel down the street? They tried to steal one of my clients last week, said they'd do it cheaper. Cheaper, as if we're selling fish at the market." Vibia snorted. "Sisters in coin, rivals in survival. That's all we are, isn't it?" Livia bit into the bread, the crust scraping her gums, and said nothing. The others' laughter swelled again, carrying them away from the truth they all felt but dared not share. Each joke, each crude story, was a stone laid upon the wall they built between themselves and the things that could not be mended. The cough, the vanishing of girls like Flavia, the knowledge that their bodies were both livelihood and slow undoing. For a moment, it worked. Livia allowed herself to be carried by the sound, to pretend she was safe inside the fortress of their wit. She smiled at Vibia's story about a client who had tried to pay in chicken eggs, groaned at Drusilla's mimicry of a senator who squealed like a piglet. The women clapped and cackled, their laughter unsteady but real. Then came the knock. 3 firm raps on the doorframe, pulling the air from the room. The women went still, their masks of humor slipping. Drusilla sighed and stood. "Back to the mill," she said, brushing crumbs from her lap. Livia forced her smile to linger a heartbeat longer, though her chest felt tight again. She rose, smoothed her tunic, and stepped away from the gossip's thin shield. The cough echoed in her memory as she walked toward the knock, toward the next transaction, toward the endless rhythm of survival. The knock was softer this time, hesitant, as if the hand behind it feared being heard at all. Livia opened the curtain to find a boy standing there. No more than 18, perhaps younger if the shadows weren't lying. His hair was uncombed, his tunic too large for his frame, and he held his coin pouch as though it might leap away. His eyes stayed down, fixed on the stone floor, as though meeting her gaze would burn him. "Come," Livia said gently, gesturing him inside. Her tone carried none of the rough edge she used with soldiers or drunks. This one needed a softer hand. The boy shuffled forward, fumbling with the pouch until coins spilled across his palm. His fingers trembled as he tried to count them. Livia reached out, steadying his hand with her own. "Take your time. No one's judging here." His shoulders eased, if only a fraction. He glanced up quickly, then down again, murmuring something she couldn't catch. Livia smiled faintly. She had seen this before, the awkwardness of first-timers, the weight of expectation pressed onto youth by peers or pride. Some came eager, others terrified. She much preferred the latter. "Sit," she told him, guiding him toward the low couch. He obeyed, perching on the edge as though the cushions might swallow him whole. His knees knocked together, his hands clutched tight in his lap. Livia spoke softly, with the calm patience of a woman who had long ago learned that words could smooth more than touch. "It's all right. You don't have to rush. You're safe here." The boy nodded quickly, his ears reddening. He handed over the pouch at last. All of it, though the sum was more than the price. Livia knew he didn't realize, or perhaps he did, and offered it anyway, a token of gratitude or desperation not to be thought foolish. She accepted without correction. Mercy in her trade was measured not by refusing coins, but by sparing dignity. The rest unfolded gently, without clumsiness, because Livia steered every moment. She spoke when silence grew heavy, laughed lightly when his movements faltered, kept the rhythm steady until his nerves loosened and his breath came easier. For once, she felt less like a body being used and more like a guide through some rite of passage. When it was done, the boy lingered, cheeks flushed but calmer than when he had entered. He whispered a thank you so quiet it was almost swallowed by the room. Then he left, steps light, as though he carried relief on his back. Livia sat alone, drawing the pouch toward her. She counted the coins, far too many for a visit so brief. She tucked them away carefully, but it was not the weight of money that lingered. It was the boy's grateful eyes, the way he had exhaled like a man unburdened. She leaned back, resting against the cushions. The brothel smelled no sweeter, the walls no cleaner, but for a rare moment the work had felt less cruel. She thought of it as selling solace with skin, a transaction the city would never dignify, but one she understood well. Livia allowed herself a breath of quiet satisfaction, then closed her eyes briefly. Another knock would come soon enough, but for now she let the silence hold her, her hand resting on the pouch, on the small victory it represented. The room was quiet, save for the faint creak of the wooden cot beneath her. Livia sat hunched forward, a small pouch of coins resting open in her lap. She let the bronze discs spill between her fingers, listening to their soft clink as they struck one another. To most it was an ordinary sound. To her it was the rhythm of survival. She began, as always, with the tally. 3 coins for bread, the rough kind, dense and stale by the second day. 10 for sandals, though hers were worn thin, straps patched more than once. Wine, when she dared, cost 5, though she seldom allowed herself that indulgence. She placed the coins into neat little piles, each stack a fragment of her life measured in copper and bronze. Her body, however, had no fixed rate. A soldier might toss her 2 coins and vanish, while a merchant, drunk with pride or pity, might leave behind a small handful. Tonight's nervous boy had given far more than he knew. And so she thought, a smile for a coin, a touch for 2. What's my name worth? Her fingers stilled. She looked down at the scattered coins, seeing not wealth, but a ledger that never balanced. No matter how many stacks she built, there was always another expense waiting. Rent for the cot, oil for the lamp, soap when she could afford the dignity of smelling clean. The arithmetic was cruel, and it told a truth she could not ignore. She could never save enough. Freedom was a word, nothing more, spoken by men in togas at the forum, but in places like this, it was a lie written in bronze. Each coin promised survival for another day, but never escape. She leaned back against the wall, her head resting against the rough plaster. Shadows from the half-burnt lamp wavered across her face. She imagined sandals finer than hers, a loaf of bread warm and soft, perhaps even a dress dyed in color. Yet even those thoughts felt like theft from a future she would never reach. The cough from the corner room echoed faintly in her memory, reminding her that even survival had limits. A single illness could empty all the piles she so carefully counted. A single night's violence could undo everything. She pressed her lips together, steadying herself, though the silence only deepened her thoughts. Her hands moved automatically, scooping the coins back into the pouch. The weight was small, almost laughably so, yet it was all she had. She tied the string tight, as though that alone might hold her life together. The melancholy pressed in heavier now. She thought of the girls who had vanished, Flavia, and others before her. No matter how many nights they worked, the coins had never bought them more than a cot, a crust, and a fleeting illusion of safety. That was the cycle. That was the trap. From outside, the bells tolled low and resonant, marking the noon hour. The sound carried through the walls, pulling her from thought. Noon meant new footsteps would soon echo in the hallways. New clients, new smiles, new bargains of skin for bronze. Livia closed her eyes for a brief moment, exhaling slowly. Reflection was a luxury, and luxury had no place here. She pushed the pouch beneath her cot, smoothed her hair with quick hands, and rose. The tolling bells had summoned her back to work, and whatever her thoughts had uncovered, they would have to remain unspoken. The afternoon heat pressed down like a heavy hand, muffling the usual stir within the lupanar. For a rare moment, the rooms were quiet. Clients who had come early now dozed in shaded taverns or lingered over watered wine, and the street outside slowed with the sun's weight. Inside, the air hung still, thick with the mingled scents of oil, dust, and worn linen. Livia leaned against the doorframe, pressing her eye to a narrow crack in the wood. Beyond, the street unfolded in fragments, slivers of sky, flashes of movement, the blur of sandals crossing stone. For once, there was no summons, no coin pressing into her palm. She allowed herself the indulgence of watching. A cart rattled past, its wooden wheels groaning beneath the weight of amphorae. Behind it ran two children, chasing a bruised piece of fruit that had tumbled from a vendor's basket. Their laughter rose high and bright, a sound so unburdened it made her chest tighten. Across the street, a woman balanced a tray of amulets strung on twine, calling out charms against fever and jealousy. Few stopped to listen, but her voice was steady, as if belief itself were worth more than sales. Livia's gaze lingered on the woman longer than she meant. She wondered what it was to stand beneath the open sky, to speak loudly without fear of who might answer. Out there, they moved free. In here, they counted shadows. Her lips parted, shaping a thought she would not dare voice aloud. What if I were among them? She imagined herself walking with sandals unbroken, a coin purse that did not need guarding, perhaps even a child tugging at her sleeve. The thought held her for a moment, fragile and dangerous, before dissolving like smoke. Reality pressed back in. This was the life she knew, and Rome's streets had no place for her except behind this door. Brothels were not hidden, but woven openly into the fabric of the city, vice displayed as plainly as bread or cloth. Here, men came not to whisper but to spend, their footsteps as common as those to the forum or the baths. It was all one tapestry: commerce, hunger, desire, threads knotted together without shame. Vice woven into Rome's streets, she thought, and for the first time it sounded less like bitterness and more like a fact carved into the stones beneath her feet. A cough stirred behind her, faint but persistent. She closed her eye, letting the door's crack slip into darkness. Drusilla's sickness lingered still, and the lull had given her no true escape from its echo. With a small sigh, Livia turned from the door. From a shallow dish she lit a stick of incense, its thin smoke curling upward. She placed it near Drusilla's cot, a quiet offering to whatever gods still glanced toward women like them. The sick girl stirred slightly, her breath rasping but steady. Livia stood a moment longer, watching the smoke trail weave upward, then straightened her tunic and pushed her hair back. The lull was ending. Soon the footsteps would return, and with them the evening wave of faces and demands. Her brief vision of freedom vanished as quickly as it had come. She pressed her lips together, grounding herself. Work awaited, and longing was a luxury she could not afford. By the time the sun dipped low, the air in the lupanar shifted. What had been quiet, almost drowsy hours gave way to the restless hum of evening. Shadows lengthened across the worn stone floors, and with them came the men, cloaked figures with wine-stained lips, their laughter spilling ahead of them like the scent of spilled drink. The city outside had loosened with darkness, and its pulse now throbbed here, in these narrow rooms. Livia felt the change before she saw it. The corridors filled with footsteps, coins clinking like promises in careless hands. Somewhere in the main hall, a burst of laughter rose, joined by the sharper tones of haggling. The air thickened with perfumes, sweat, and the metallic tang of bronze. She sat at her small mirror, a cracked shard propped on a wooden shelf, and leaned close. Her fingers dipped into the dish of ochre, smoothing the pigment across her cheeks. The faint flush it created gave her face a liveliness that belied the weariness in her eyes. She drew her hair back, rebraiding the strands into a tighter knot. Each gesture was practiced, precise, movements drilled by habit, but charged tonight with a spark of hope. One good coin could change the night, she murmured to her reflection. Her tunic she adjusted with care, pulling the fabric so it clung just enough to suggest without revealing. A string of glass beads lay across her collarbone, catching the torchlight. It was a fragile armor, but armor nonetheless. In this house, appearance was both invitation and defense. The noise around her swelled. From one room came the sound of a lyre, badly tuned but energetic. From another, the low murmur of negotiations, punctuated by a sharp slap and laughter. The brothel was alive, its walls vibrating with Rome's unspoken hungers. This was not the weary shuffle of the morning shift, nor the hesitant fumbling of boys seeking first experience. Evening brought bolder men, cloaks drawn tight against the night, eager to shed their identities as quickly as their sandals. Among them were those of rank, men whose voices outside these walls commanded silence, but who here sought anonymity. They came wrapped in shadow, chasing a thrill that lay not just in the bodies they purchased, but in the secrecy itself. Livia thought of them as power-chasing shadows, their coins heavy with authority, yet spent in darkness where names dissolved. She straightened, slipping her coin pouch beneath the cot for luck. Her gaze moved to the door, listening for the next step that might pause before it. The evening always carried risk as much as promise. A generous man could leave her with enough bronze to ease tomorrow's hunger. A cruel one could undo the fragile control she clung to. The rhythm of the night deepened. A client stumbled drunkenly past her door, singing fragments of a soldier's marching song. Another called out for wine, his voice booming until it was swallowed by laughter. Livia inhaled slowly, centering herself, as though stillness might summon fortune. Then came a different sound, softer, deliberate. A footfall that paused just beyond her threshold. The torchlight from the corridor cast a thin glow beneath the door. She heard the fabric of a cloak shift, the faint jingle of coins held close. Her breath caught. Whoever he was, he lingered instead of barging in, as if weighing his choice. That hesitation marked him as different. Slowly, Livia rose and smoothed her tunic once more. The door creaked open, and in its frame stood a man cloaked heavily, his hood drawn low. She could not see his face, only the glimmer of intent in the way he filled the doorway. The night had begun in earnest. The cloaked man stepped inside and closed the door softly, as though afraid even the hinges might betray him. Livia studied him in the torchlight. Young, too young for the heaviness with which he carried himself. His cloak smelled faintly of resin and fine oil, a scent she recognized not from the streets, but from Rome's villas, where cedarwood fires burned through the night. He pulled back his hood. His face was pale, smooth, the skin of someone who had never known the lash of labor. Yet his eyes darted quickly, like a boy caught trespassing. Livia understood before he spoke. This was no soldier, no freedman. This was someone raised on marble floors, slipping into shadows for hunger he could not admit. Felicia, he whispered, using a false name as all men here did. Be still. She inclined her head, letting her body go quiet, her breath shallow, her movements muted until she was almost a statue. He wanted silence, control, not the chatter, not the coaxing some clients demanded. To be still was to surrender, yet also to hold power, for in that stillness, She was shaping the moment exactly as he desired. Minutes passed in careful quiet. His hands trembled, though he fought to steady them. When at last he moved away, there was relief in his breath, as though he had purged something poisonous. He lingered by the cot, hood half drawn again, not meeting her eyes. Then, wordlessly, he reached into his cloak and set something on the small table. 3 gold ori. Livia froze. For a heartbeat she thought she was mistaken, that it was merely bronze catching the light. But no, the weight, the shine, the unmistakable glint of wealth beyond anything she had touched. 3 coins of gold, more than she might earn in an entire month, lying within arm's reach. Her chest tightened. Gold was not the coin of her world. Bread, sandals, a smile. Those were priced in bronze or at best in silver. But this was another realm altogether. He kept his gaze low as he pulled the cloak tighter around his frame. "Nothing happened," he said in a rush, his voice taut with shame and command all at once. "Do you understand? Nothing happened." Livia bowed her head slightly, masking the storm in her chest. "Gold for silence," she thought. "I can do that." When he slipped out, the door closed with the same soft care as it had opened, leaving behind only the faint trace of resin and the impossible gleam of wealth on her table. She sat motionless for a long moment, staring at the coins. Nobles hiding in plain shame, she thought. Men who ruled outside these walls but crept in here to strip away their masks. Rome's power came cloaked in darkness, no less hungry than any other man. Her hands trembled as she gathered the coins and tucked them beneath the thin mat of her cot, burying them in cloth. The touch of gold seemed almost dangerous, as though the very metal might draw unwanted eyes. Yet her heart thudded with something more than fear. Hope. 3 ori could mean sandals, food, medicine. More than that, a glimpse of possibility she had long since stopped imagining. She pressed her palm over the hidden coins, her breath catching as if the walls themselves might hear. The sound of the brothel continued around her, laughter, bargaining, footsteps. But within her room, everything had shifted. At last, she rose, her body unsteady, and slipped into the corridor. The torches burned low, the air still thick with wine and desire. But her thoughts were elsewhere, on the hidden weight of gold, and on the dangerous, dizzying thought that her life might not always be counted in bronze. The door creaked as Livia slipped into the alley, letting it close quietly behind her. For the first time that evening, the air felt bearable. The heat of the day had bled away, leaving a warmth that wrapped rather than suffocated. Here, at least, the stench of wine, sweat, and incense faded. The alley carried only the faint smell of damp stone and fig leaves stirred by a breeze. Above, the night stretched open, black velvet pierced by scattered stars. Rome's rooftops framed the sky like jagged teeth, but the stars endured, bright and unyielding. She tilted her head back, and for a moment, the world seemed larger than the narrow rooms and counting of coins. Her hand drifted instinctively to her waist, where the memory of the gold burned hotter than the torchlight within. 3 ori, hidden beneath her mat, yet heavy still in her chest. A month's worth of freedom, a glimpse at something more. Her lips parted, and before she could stop herself, a word escaped, soft, almost alien to her own ears. Aurelia. The name hung in the alley like a secret prayer. She had not spoken it in years, not since the day she was pulled into this life and buried it beneath false names and painted smiles. To whisper it now felt both dangerous and holy, as though she had called back a ghost. Her real name. The one her mother had spoken by a hearth. The one sewn into the fabric of a girl who once believed the world was wider than 4 walls. She whispered it again, barely audible. Aurelia, that's who I was. Am I still? The stars seemed to listen, indifferent yet vast, reminding her that somewhere above the stink of Rome and its endless hierarchies, the sky offered no ranks, a city where senators strutted in daylight, where slaves bent under burdens, where brothels crowded alleys. Yet here, under the stars, no man's coin mattered. As though in that expanse, stars outranked shadows. Her breath caught. 3 aurae. Could they be enough? Enough for sandals and a cloak, for passage beyond the gates, for a chance to vanish into some place where her name might be Aurelia again? The thought flared bright, almost blinding, and yet she knew the trap of hope. She had seen others crushed beneath it, dreaming of freedom only to wake tighter bound. Gold drew attention, and attention was danger. One mistake, one careless boast, and the coins would be gone, or worse, she would. So she pressed her hand flat against her chest as if to smother the beating of her own heart. She could not afford to dream too loud. The alley was silent, save for the faint rustle of fig leaves, the drip of water from a gutter. Livia lingered, gazing upward, allowing herself the smallest sliver of longing before reality called her back. And then, it came. Footsteps. Heavy, unsteady, a group of them, laughter echoing off stone walls, wine-soaked voices stumbling nearer. The sound jolted her, snapped the fragile thread of thought like a string pulled taut and broken. She drew her cloak tighter, retreating toward the door. The stars vanished behind the threshold as she slipped back into the lupanar's embrace. Inside, the air thickened again with smoke and heat. The sound of coins clinking, laughter rolling, doors opening and closing pulled her back into the current she could never quite escape. But in her chest, tucked deep where no one could reach, her name burned brighter than the torches. Aurelia. And beneath her mat, 3 golden coins waited, silent, dangerous and alive with possibility. The night pressed on, and so did she. The quiet of the alley vanished as soon as Livia stepped back inside. A wave of sound met her, laughter too loud, words too slurred, footsteps that stumbled yet demanded space. A group of men had arrived, their cloaks thrown back, cheeks flushed from wine, their breath already sour with the promise of trouble. They filled the narrow corridor like an army of mockery, pointing at the painted frescoes that lined the walls. Each scene, lovers tangled, bodies poised in impossible contortions, was met with jeers and imitation. One man pressed his companion against the wall, mimicking a fresco's arch with drunken exaggeration, nearly toppling over as the others roared with laughter. Another raised his hands theatrically toward a painting of Venus reclining, calling out, "Which of you plays the goddess tonight?" His voice carried down the hall, careless of who heard. Livia's face formed a practiced smile, one she had rehearsed as armor. She moved toward them with steady grace, though her pulse flickered. "Gentlemen," she said, gesturing lightly toward one of the more elaborate frescoes, "choose your painting, but don't try it at home." The men howled at her remark, slapping each other's shoulders as though she had joined their game. It was the trick, deflect with humor, lean into their noise without letting it pierce too deep. One of them, younger but already glazed with wine, pointed toward Livia, who stood just beyond the lamplight. His finger wavered as though even the act of choosing was too heavy for his drink-stained hand. "That one. She looks as tired as my wife." Livia sighed, her shoulders sinking, but she stepped forward without protest. Her eyes caught Livia's for only a second, a flicker of resignation passing between them before she guided the man toward a doorway. The rest of the group carried on, bellowing about which fresco was the real menu of the house. Rome's walls had become more than art. They sold more than beauty. Each painted figure was an advertisement, a promise, a silent instruction to men too drunk to ask for words. In this place, art was not worship but transaction. Brushstrokes turned into prices. Livia kept her smile in place, nodding, answering with light banter where required. She moved among them like a shadow, present but untouched, letting their crude energy pass over her as though she were marble, not flesh. Detachment was survival. Her silence was its own shield. At last, their attention dispersed, each man drawn toward a chosen door, laughter fading into muffled echoes behind wood. The corridor quieted, though the air still throbbed with the residue of their noise. Livia exhaled and turned back toward her own room. Yet something caught her eye before she entered. On the wall, just beneath a familiar fresco, new scratches marked the plaster. Letters, roughly carved, crooked but legible under the flickering lamplight. Graffiti. She leaned closer, tracing the lines with her gaze. Words etched by a hand bold enough to leave them behind. She read, and for a moment the chaos of drunken men faded, replaced by a stillness that settled heavy in her chest. Her smile slipped, replaced by thought. She had deflected their laughter, survived their choosing. But here on the wall was something else, a voice without a face waiting for her to notice. The wall held her in place. Livia bent close, the dim lamplight licking across the rough plaster where a hand, not careful, not artistic, had carved a message. The scratches were shallow, uneven, but unmistakable. Her name, Livia, and beside it, a jagged heart. Beneath the words, best embrace. She traced the letters without touching, as if contact might erase them. The strokes were clumsy, dug into the wall with a knife or nail. No flourish, no elegance, just a mark left by someone too hurried or too drunk to care for beauty. And yet, the words struck deeper than any chisel. Livia, best embrace. She let the phrase roll in her mind, tasting it the way she once whispered her true name in the quiet alley. Was it meant as flattery? A boast scribbled by a man bragging to others who might pass? Or was it a crude joke, carved with laughter still lingering in the hallway air? The ambiguity didn't matter. It was her name, scratched into stone, surviving beyond the moment. For all the men who left without memory, without even turning their heads, here was proof. She had existed, and someone wanted others to know. A smile flickered across her lips, quick, almost ashamed. At least they spelled it right. Her gaze lifted to the rest of the wall. She saw more words, more jagged claims layered one over another. The plaster was crowded with them. Names of women, Livia, Thais, Felicia, paired with comments and crude scores. Some carved hearts, others wrote tallies, as if keeping records of conquests. There were boasts scratched in Latin. I was here. I paid well. She was mine. Each line a voice shouting into eternity, though most were already fading, half lost to time and weather. The walls of the lupanar had become an archive, but not of history worth recording. They were crowded with whispers of those who would never be named in marble or scroll. These were the stone whispers of forgotten lives, men desperate to leave a mark, women reduced to a memory traded in shadows. And now she was one of them. Her name carved here meant nothing to the Senate, nothing to Rome, nothing even to her family, if they still lived, if they even thought of her. But it meant something to this wall, to this place. A fleeting legacy, etched where no monument would rise. She felt both pride and sorrow settle in her chest, tangled together. Pride, that her name was chosen, remembered, immortalized however crudely. Sorrow, that this was all she had, a compliment blurred between mockery and desire, pressed into stone where only strangers' eyes would read it. The heart beside her name seemed to mock her more than the words. Was it sincere? Or was it simply the hand of a man pretending sentiment to amuse his companions? She would never know. She could only live with the proof it left. Her breath slowed, and for a rare moment, she allowed herself to imagine. If she left, if the 3 gold coins hidden beneath her bedding truly carried her beyond these walls, would anyone carve her name elsewhere? Would anyone remember the sound of her laughter, the feel of her hand? Or would her memory vanish the moment she stepped outside? She drew back, leaning against the opposite wall, watching the graffiti glow faintly in the lamplight. It was nothing. It was everything. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock. 3 short taps against wood, the signal she knew too well. A client waiting. A man who would not care about her name, only her silence and her body. She let the sigh escape only once, quiet, swallowed by the walls. Then she straightened, fixing the smile she had worn so many times. The words stayed behind, etched into plaster. A legacy, however small, and Livia turned back to work. The man at her door looked nothing like the others. His robe, once fine, now hung loose and frayed, the hem darkened with dust. He hesitated in the doorway as if crossing the threshold were too great a shame to bear. His eyes, downcast, carried not the restless hunger of wine-drunk men, but the heavy shadow of loss. Livia stepped aside without a word, allowing him in. He moved slowly, as though the air itself resisted him. When he sat on the edge of her narrow bed, his hands trembled, fingers clutching the fabric as though anchoring himself against some unseen current. She studied him with practiced caution. Most men wore masks of bravado. This one carried only defeat. At last, he spoke. His voice cracked like dry wood. "My father's disgrace ruined us. He fell from favor. The Senate stripped his titles. The estates are gone. We live on scraps." The confession tumbled out, half whisper, half sob. "My brothers look at me like I should fix it, but I can't. I can't even bear to look them in the eye." Livia lowered herself beside him, her movements careful, as though soothing a wounded animal. She did not reach for his hand, nor did she press close. She simply waited. He turned to her, eyes red. "My father would die if he knew I came here." Her lips curved, not into a smile, but something gentler. "He's probably got his own secrets." For the first time, a spark of breath left him, almost a laugh, though it drowned in sorrow before it could rise. Then, without asking, he leaned forward. His forehead came to rest against her shoulder, the weight of his grief pressing into her skin. Livia stilled, her heart tightening with something unfamiliar, not the numb detachment she relied upon, nor the forced warmth she gave clients, but genuine compassion. She let him stay there, quiet in her embrace, her hand rising only once to steady him against her. No words passed between them. The silence was its own language, softer than confession, sharper than prayer. In that moment, she thought of all the men who came here seeking release. Most wanted only flesh and forgetting, but this man, this fallen son, wanted something rarer. Not passion, not escape, but the simple permission to be broken in front of someone who would not judge him. It struck her, not for the first time, that women like her were the unseen confessors of Rome. Priests heard the sins of the devout. Courtesans heard the sins of the living. They were the keepers of Rome's secrets, holding them in silence, never to be carved on marble or papyrus. When he finally lifted his head, his face seemed lighter, though the grief had not gone. He fumbled at his belt and set 3 bronze coins on the table. Too much for the time they had spent, yet not nearly enough for what he sought. She did not protest. Payment was a ritual, and he needed it to keep the shame from devouring him whole. As he rose, he whispered, "Thank you." Livia inclined her head, nothing more. She had given him no pleasure, no promise, only her shoulder, and it had been enough. When he left, the room felt strangely hollow. She lingered for a moment, staring at the coins glinting dully in the lamplight, wondering how much pain Rome hid behind its marble walls. Then the sound reached her, voices raised in the corridor, sharp with anger. She straightened, smoothing her hair, and stepped into the hall. The voices outside had sharpened into knives by the time Livia stepped into the hall. Livia stood with her arms folded, lips curled in contempt, her cheeks flushed from fury. Opposite her, Claudia leaned against the wall, arms spread wide in mock innocence. Between them, a man slouched, tugging nervously at his tunic, eyes darting from one woman to the other like a trapped animal. "You undercut me," Livia snapped, her finger stabbing the air toward Claudia. "He was mine. He came to me first, and then you lured him off with a cheaper price like some market vendor hawking spoiled olives." Claudia rolled her eyes, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "If he prefers me, what does it matter what he paid? Not my fault if he doesn't think you're worth the coin you demand." The client mumbled something, but his voice was too soft, too slurred to carry over the women's raised tones. From the shadows near the stair, Drusilla caught Livia's eye. The madam tilted her chin, a silent summons. This was not the first quarrel of its kind, and Drusilla trusted Livia's calm to cut through the noise where her own temper might ignite it further. Livia inhaled slowly, tamping down the weariness that threatened to surface. She stepped forward, her voice steady and low, slicing into the din. Enough. All of you. The command silenced the hall. Even the client looked up at her as though she had spoken a priest's incantation. Vibia, Livia began, her gaze firm. You say he was yours first. Claudia, you say he chose you. Fine. Let's hear it from the man himself. The client shifted on his feet, sweat beading on his brow. I only went to Claudia because she asked less. I don't have much coin. Livia arched a brow. His honesty came out not from courage, but from the loose tongue of a man ashamed. She turned to the women, her tone clipped, pragmatic. You see? He wasn't worth the fight. A man who bargains down your worth will do it again and again. You lower yourselves for him, and what do you get? A handful of bronze and bruised pride. Battles over crumbs of coin are battles lost before they begin. Vibia's mouth tightened, her anger folding into sullen resentment. Claudia tilted her chin, but even she looked uneasy under Livia's calm dissection. Take the lesson, Livia continued. The men who haggle, let them go. Spend your charm on those who can pay properly. If not, you'll end the night with nothing but bitterness. And I'll not spend my nights breaking up more of your squabbles. Her words settled over them like a net. Neither woman spoke. The client gave a half-hearted shrug, as if trying to disappear into the stones. Go, Livia told him, gesturing toward the door. He hesitated, then shuffled off into the night, his coin still jingling faintly at his belt. Vibia muttered under her breath but turned away. Claudia followed, her smirk thinner now, more hollow. The hall emptied, leaving only the faint echo of their footsteps and the sour taste of the argument lingering in the air. Drusilla's gaze flicked once more toward Livia, a brief nod of gratitude before she returned to her accounts. Livia exhaled, the exhaustion seeping back into her bones now that the confrontation had passed. Authority was a burden, even when borrowed. She retreated to her room, closing the door with deliberate care. The quiet pressed around her like a balm, soft and welcome. She lay back on the bed, letting her limbs sink into stillness, but peace was not hers to keep. A knock came at the door, soft at first, then insistent. The knock at her door was hesitant, like the touch of someone unsure if they had the right to disturb. Livia sighed and rose, pushing back the weight of exhaustion. When she opened it, she found not a client, nor Drusilla, but a girl she had seen only in passing. Julia. She was young, too young, Livia thought with a pang, her wide eyes darting down the hall as though afraid of being seen. Her hair was hastily braided, her cheeks still pink with nervous heat. She clutched her hands together as if they were her last anchor. May I come in?" she whispered. Livia stepped aside without a word. Julia slipped inside, her presence small but trembling, like a bird flown into the wrong cage. For a long moment Julia said nothing, only stood by the wall twisting her fingers. At last she asked, voice barely audible, "Is it always like this?" Livia studied her. She remembered the same question, though she had asked it only in her own head, never daring to give it voice. She gestured toward the bed, and Julia sat, perching on the edge as if the mattress might swallow her. "It gets easier," Livia said after a pause. Then, with a wry curl of her lips, she added, "Easier to fake." Julia blinked as though unsure whether to take comfort or despair from the words. "I thought," she faltered, "I thought if I smiled enough, if I was kind, it wouldn't be so hard. But the men..." Her voice broke, and she pressed her lips together to hold back tears. "I don't know how to do this." Livia sat beside her, the space between them close, but not suffocating. "Neither did I," she admitted. My first night. I shook so badly the man asked if I was ill. Drusilla told me later I should have asked for double for the performance. A hollow chuckle escaped her throat. Confidence is a mask, Julia. Learn to wear it. Even if it cracks, most won't look closely enough to see. Julia lowered her gaze. I don't have anywhere else to go. No family, no home. If I fail here... Her voice trailed into silence, the weight of her words needing no completion. Livia's chest tightened. She could offer no miracle, no escape, only survival. You won't fail, she said, her tone steady, as though sheer conviction could will it true. You'll find your way, like the rest of us. We're all just birds caught in Rome's net. Some flap harder than others, but we're still trapped together. At least you're not alone in the snare. Julia nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in her throat. She looked at Livia with something close to gratitude, fragile, desperate gratitude, and rose. Thank you. I'll try. Livia managed a faint smile. That's all there is. Trying, until it feels like less of a try. Julia slipped back into the hallway, her footsteps light, hesitant, but carrying her forward nonetheless. When the door shut, Livia sank onto her bed, the silence rushing back like a tide. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, the echoes of Julia's plea mingling with the ghost of her own long-ago fear. The sounds of the lupanar leaked through the walls. Laughter, groans, the clink of coin against wood. Life carried on, relentless, indifferent. Her eyes closed, not in rest, but in resignation, as the night pressed on. The scent reached Livia before the woman did. A thin ribbon of frankincense, so out of place amid the musk of sweat, wine, and cheap perfume that it seemed almost unreal. She looked up from her quiet corner in the hall to see a figure gliding through the doorway. The woman was veiled, her cloak heavy with the folds of ritual, the hem still carrying dust from the temple steps. No rouge or painted kohl softened her face, only the pale stillness of skin half hidden beneath linen. A hush followed her entry, a ripple of silence that seemed to command more reverence than the most demanding of clients ever had. Drusilla emerged from her chamber, her sharp gaze narrowing at the sight, though not in displeasure. Without a word, she gestured for the priestess to follow. The two disappeared into the madam's quarters, the door shutting firmly behind them. The silence broke into a hum of whispers. Livia was the first to lean toward the others, her voice pitched low but brimming with mischief. She didn't come here for the usual, she muttered. Didn't even glance at the girls, straight to Drusilla, and she kept her veil on. Claudia smirked. Maybe piety isn't as dull as it looks. But Livia shook her head with certainty. No, she didn't undress. Just talked. Livia, who had been listening quietly, let her gaze linger on the closed door. The thought settled uneasily in her chest. She finally said in her measured way, "That's never just talking." The women chuckled nervously, but the speculation carried on. Some swore it must be about a curse or a confession hidden from the temple walls. Others insisted it was payment for silence. Priests and priestesses often knew more of Rome's secrets than the Senate itself. Livia said nothing, though her mind stirred. What did a woman bound to the gods want from a brothel keeper? Was it leverage? Some secret too dangerous to keep within holy walls? Or perhaps more dangerously, was it salvation? The thought of sacred hands reaching toward the profane seemed almost laughable, and yet, here the priestess was. Her presence was a paradox, the sacred crossing profane lines. Livia thought of how often priests themselves had been seen at brothel doors, cloaks slipping, eyes darting in shame, or hunger. Rome had always been a city where holy and unholy danced together in shadow. Still, this visit felt different. It had the weight of intention, of a ritual without witnesses. The whispers grew louder, each girl spinning her own tale, but Livia remained apart, lost in her reflections. She could almost picture Drusilla's room now, the smoke curling from an oil lamp, the murmurs exchanged, the careful measuring of words like coin on a scale. Minutes stretched. The door stayed shut. When at last the priestess emerged, her face was unreadable beneath the veil. Her steps were swift, almost too swift, as though afraid the walls themselves might overhear. No one dared speak until the door closed again behind her, the faint smell of incense trailing into absence. It was Livia, of course, who broke the spell. Well, whatever she paid, it wasn't in denarii. The girls laughed, but the sound was brittle. Livia only leaned back, folding her arms. The questions gnawed at her, refusing to be silenced. What bargains could pass between the temple and the lupanar? What truth could make a priestess seek out Drusilla's counsel in secret? She did not have long to dwell. A shout rang out from the atrium, male, angry, the kind of voice that made the hairs at the back of the neck rise. The tension of curiosity gave way to the harsher pull of trouble. Drusilla's door creaked open at the sound, but it was Livia who moved first, her weariness heavy yet her steps steady, drawn toward the swelling argument that waited in the hall. The shout rattled through the atrium, loud enough to cut across the whispers left in the priestess's wake. Livia stepped closer, and there in the open space, she saw the source. A drunk, red-faced man swaying unsteadily, his voice raised in slurred outrage. "You promised me another round," he barked, pointing an unsteady finger at Livia. His toga was half loosened, stained with wine, his breath sour enough to make the girls nearest him wrinkle their noses. Livia stood with her arms folded, unimpressed. "I promised nothing. You've drunk what you paid for. That's the end of it." The client's voice rose higher, his words blurring into curses. He slammed his fist against the wall for emphasis, startling one of the younger girls who darted back toward the safety of the corridor. The sound carried through the lupanar, pulling curious heads from doorways. Livia lingered near the edge, her expression calm, though her chest tightened at the familiar tension. She knew how quickly such arguments could tip from noise into blows. Then Drusilla arrived. The madam moved like a storm, her sandals clapping hard against the stone floor, her body upright and brimming with authority. In one hand she carried a broom, of all things, its straw end frayed from use. But in Drusilla's grip, it might as well have been a weapon forged of iron. "Enough!" she snapped, her voice cutting sharper than the man's bluster. She planted herself squarely in front of him, broom raised just slightly. "Pay or leave. 5 seconds." The room fell still. The drunk stared at her, wavering between bravado and the sudden recognition of a woman who would not bend. He spat a wordless insult, but when she took one firm step closer, raising the broom like a soldier's spear, he stumbled back. Livia smirked and muttered loudly enough for all to hear, "He's not worth the broom." A ripple of laughter ran through the gathered women, a quick flare of amusement that loosened the tight coil of fear. The client, red with a mixture of drink and humiliation, staggered toward the door. Drusilla followed, broom poised, until he crossed the threshold. With a final shove, she sent him sprawling into the street, his curses now muffled by the heavy wooden door that slammed shut behind him. For a moment there was silence. Then the atrium erupted, not in shouts but in laughter. It was the kind of laughter born of nerves released, sharp and joyous in its own small rebellion. Claudia leaned against the wall, wiping tears from her eyes. "One day, Drusilla, you'll kill a man with that broom." "Good," Drusilla retorted dryly, setting it aside. "Then he'll finally be useful, as a warning." The women cackled, some clapping their hands, others trading knowing looks. The tension melted away, leaving in its place a rare sense of solidarity. In a world where men dictated terms, Drusilla stood as their sword and shield, though armed only with her wit and her broom. Livia found herself smiling despite the weariness pulling at her bones. It was a fragile camaraderie, fleeting as candlelight, but it mattered. It reminded her that survival in this place wasn't only about enduring clients or debts. It was about standing together, however briefly. The moment passed. Already outside the doors, the sound of late-night footsteps was gathering, signaling the next wave of men seeking distraction. With a soft sigh, Livia turned away, smoothing her hair, adjusting her dress. The battle was over, but the night was far from done. The doors opened again, and with them came the raucous tide of the late-night crowd. Their arrival was never quiet. It was an invasion. Heavy boots struck the stone floor, laughter rang out, and coins clinked as they were tossed onto tables or spun into the air for sport. The air thickened with the stench of wine and sweat, the sharp tang of men who had already emptied more than one amphora before stumbling into the lupanar. These were not the polished visitors of early evening, the senators who came veiled or the merchants who slipped in discreetly. These were Rome's shadows made flesh, soldiers fresh from dice games, artisans with pay still jingling in their pouches, petty gamblers eager to spend their winnings before dawn. Loud, bold, and careless, they demanded attention the moment they entered, shouting names, grabbing arms, and slamming coins onto the nearest surface as if daring anyone to refuse them. Livia drew a long, invisible breath before stepping into their orbit. Her body was weary, but weariness was not permitted here. With a practiced smile, she moved between them, her voice pitched to match their energy. Her words threaded with flattery that cost her nothing but bought her everything. She stroked egos, laughed at jokes she barely heard, and pretended to be charmed by boasts of dice throws, brawls, and imagined conquests. "Wine for him," one man barked, pointing at a companion, "and the best for me." He tossed a coin at Livia's feet, as though she were a slave to fetch and carry. She bent to pick it up, her expression smooth, her words honeyed. "The best is exactly what you deserve." Inside, she bit down on the resentment, locking it away where it could not be seen. Another man, broader than most, leaned close, reciting lines in halting Latin verse, his tongue thick with wine. His words tangled as he tried to shape them into something elegant. "You are brighter than Diana's light," he slurred, swaying toward her. Livia tilted her head, allowing the smirk to tug at her lips. "Nice verse," she said smoothly, her tone balanced between teasing and dismissal. "Try coin next time. It speaks clearer." The table roared with laughter at his expense, and the man joined in, too drunk to care. The moment passed, just another in the endless parade of faces and voices. Around her, the brothel vibrated with a strange kind of rhythm, men shouting for another round, women leading clients up narrow stairs, the shuffle of sandals on stone, the faint groan of wooden beds above. This was the lupanar at its loudest, its rawest, a place where Rome's shadows sought light in whatever form they could buy. Livia moved through it all with a grace that cost her dearly. Each smile was measured, each gesture calculated, her true self hidden beneath the mask of allure. She was the performance, the illusion, the shimmer that kept the chaos from turning dangerous. But exhaustion tugged at her bones, her body reminding her of its limits. She longed for quiet, for a moment away from the endless roar. At last, when the crowd's frenzy found other targets, she slipped aside, retreating to her small corner. She lit her lamp, the flame trembling at first before steadying. The light painted her room in soft gold, gentler than the garish torches outside. She allowed herself a breath, the first in hours that felt like her own. But solitude was a fragile thing here. Just as she sank onto the low bed, the knock came, sharp, deliberate, breaking through her brief reprieve. The night was not yet finished. The knock on Livia's door was softer than most. No drunken fist, no impatient shove. When she opened it, the man who entered carried himself with quiet restraint. His gray hair caught the lamplight, and in one hand he leaned on a polished staff, not for show but for support. His eyes, shadowed and tired, swept the small room as if searching for something that had been lost long ago. He did not lunge for her or reach to grasp her arm as so many did. Instead, he sank slowly onto the low stool by the bed, his breathing heavy but measured. Livia, sensing his difference, remained silent, letting the air settle between them. "I came here once," he began, his voice low, almost rasped by years of use. Not here, perhaps, but to a room like this. She was waiting, hair dark as night, laughter light as spring water. I thought the gods had placed her in my path. He pressed his hand against the staff as though grounding himself. But she vanished. Or I did. Livia tilted her head, studying him. His words carried the weight of truth, the kind not crafted for seduction, but born of memory. She let her hand rest lightly on his shoulder, not as invitation but as acknowledgement. Sometimes, she murmured, it's both. The man closed his eyes, a faint smile touching his lips at her reply. His story unfolded slowly, not in the fever of desire, but in the tremble of recollection. He spoke of roads traveled, of moments snatched between duties, of how love had felt like something eternal until time revealed its cruelty. She did not interrupt. Her role here was not to question, but to listen, to be a vessel for what he needed to release. Her silence was a gift, her presence a mirror for the ache he carried. Every so often she brushed her fingers against his hand, an anchor in the drifting sea of his grief. When he finally rose, it was with difficulty, as though his story had drained him more than any embrace might have. He bowed his head toward her, a gesture of respect rare within these walls. Carefully, he placed several coins upon the small table, more than the usual payment, but offered without pride. "You've given me something," he said, his eyes meeting hers one last time. Not her, not memory whole, but enough. And then he was gone, his staff tapping softly against the stones of the hallway, fading into the restless noise of the lupanar beyond. For a moment, the room felt like a shrine, not a chamber of transaction. Livia thought of Venus, goddess of love and longing, and how this place, so often dismissed as profane, could sometimes feel like her temple, a sanctuary not for lust alone, but for broken hearts seeking rest. She lingered beside the lamp, watching its flame flicker, the shadows dance along the walls. His words echoed inside her, not heavy but steady, as if a small part of his loss had been entrusted to her care. The night stretched on, but for now she sat still, the quiet more precious than coin. Livia had not meant to close her eyes. She had only leaned back against the wall, the lamplight low and trembling, her limbs heavy with the long night's labor. Yet exhaustion stole over her like a tide, carrying her under. When she stirred again, the room had shifted. The lamp had burned itself to a stub and died, leaving only the gray hush of pre-dawn filtering through the narrow slit of the window. The lupanar was silent now. The clamor of laughter, arguments, coins clattering onto tables, all of it had ebbed into memory. For once, no footsteps echoed in the hallway. The air was cool and smelled faintly of ashes, wine, and the faint perfume clinging to her own skin. She let her eyes close again, just for a heartbeat, savoring the rare stillness. Her hand drifted to the small pouch hidden beneath the mattress. She pulled it free and weighed it in her palm. The coins clinked softly, silver, bronze, a few tarnished denarii that seemed almost reluctant to shine. She counted them quickly, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Each coin was more than metal, each one a night endured, a part of herself given away, a small brick in the fragile wall she was building toward survival. Just a moment's rest, she thought, pressing the pouch to her chest. That's all I ask. She tucked it away again, deep into its hiding place. Others might laugh, thinking her secret hoard too small to matter, but to her, it was proof that she was not entirely trapped in the wheel that spun around her, day and night. For the first time in hours, she lay back, letting her gaze linger on the faint paling of the sky beyond the slit window. The hour was sacred in its own way, the city caught between night's shadows and the first blush of dawn. No drunkards stumbled now, no clients pounded on doors. Even the women of the brothel slept, their breathing a soft chorus behind closed walls. It was the only time the house seemed to belong to her. She thought of the day ahead, the cycle that never stopped. Coins exchanged, bodies bartered, laughter forced, tears hidden. The lupanar was a wheel, forever turning, crushing the hours into sameness. And she, caught in its spokes, longed for even this single breath of peace before it all began again. She closed her eyes, but only half slept, hovering in that fragile state between dream and waking. In her half-dream, the voices of the night returned, mingled with the soft memory of the man with the staff, of Drusilla's broom raised in defiance, of the priestess's veiled face. All of it blurred, like figures moving behind gauze. And then, breaking the quiet, a sound rose from the entrance. A woman's voice, low but clear, carrying through the atrium. It was not drunken, not pleading. It was measured, deliberate, the kind of voice that did not belong to a client. Livia's eyes snapped open, the piece cracked, and the room once again felt like a place of business. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, rubbing her face, the weight of weariness clinging like a second skin. But there was no ignoring the summons. She stood, pulling her tunic straighter, brushing hair from her eyes. The wheel had begun to turn again, and the brief stillness she had stolen was already slipping into memory. The voice that had pulled Livia from her drifting half-sleep belonged to a woman cloaked in shadow. When Livia stepped into the atrium, she found her. A tall figure, veiled from crown to chin, her hands knotted tightly in front of her. The fabric of her stola was fine, the weave too delicate for the wives of artisans or merchants. This was a matrona, noble, respectable, and entirely out of place within the walls of the lupanar. The woman's eyes, visible through the gauze of her veil, darted quickly across the silent room, as if afraid of being seen even by the women who lived here. When they finally landed on Livia, she spoke in a low, urgent voice. "Why does he come here?" The question struck with the sharpness of a blade. Livia felt her body stiffen. She had heard the tone before, though never from someone so carefully hidden. It was the tone of betrayal mixed with humiliation, the sound of a wife who had followed whispers into places she was never meant to tread. Livia glanced at the empty halls. No clients, no laughter, no drunken song, just the two of them in the gray pre-dawn. She motioned the woman closer. "Because here," Livia said evenly, "he doesn't have to be a husband." The woman flinched as if struck. She pressed her veil closer to her mouth, eyes wide, tears glistening at the rims. "He has a home," she whispered fiercely. "He has children. He has me. Why does he need this?" Livia's gaze softened, though her words remained steady. "Because what he seeks here is not love, not duty. It is permission. A place where he can be loud, selfish, foolish, without the weight of being someone's protector or father. Here he buys freedom for an hour or two, nothing more." The noblewoman drew back, her breath quickening. The truth was bitter medicine, and Livia could see her struggling to swallow it. "Do they all come for that?" the woman asked. "Most," Livia said. "Some for comfort, some for forgetting, but never for what you think. We are not rivals to wives. We are shadows, used and left behind." For a long moment, silence lay between them, thick with unspoken fears. Then slowly, the matrona reached into her sleeve and drew out a single coin, placing it on the nearest table. Not as payment, but as a gesture, as though she needed to leave something behind to mark the weight of the words exchanged. Her veil trembled as she turned toward the door. At the threshold she hesitated, glancing back at Livia one last time. Her eyes were no longer frantic, but dazed, as if she had seen into a world she had never believed existed. Without another word, she left, her footsteps fading into the waking streets. Livia stood where she was, staring at the coin glinting faintly in the dim light. Secrets traded in shadows. This too was part of the lupanar's business. She moved to the window, resting her hands on the sill as the first edge of the sun broke over Rome's rooftops. Dawn was here, and with it, the city stirred, the wheel turning once more. The night's grip loosened slowly, like fingers unclenching after too long a hold. From the doorway of the lupanar, Livia stepped onto the worn stone step and lowered herself, her body heavy with exhaustion. The air was damp with the faint scent of ash and earth, and above, The first thread of light unraveled across Pompeii's sky. Before her, the street began to stir. The stones, polished smooth by centuries of feet and wheels, caught the pale blush of morning. A vendor pulled open his shutters, yawning as he arranged figs in a basket. The sound of a broom rasping against stone followed, sharp in the fragile quiet. Birds fluttered low between the eaves, their wings catching flashes of pink in the rising light. Livia wrapped her arms around her knees. For a moment, she let herself forget the ache in her legs, the hollowness in her chest. The noblewoman's visit still lingered in her mind, the tremor in her voice, the way her eyes had shone with grief and disbelief. The coin she left behind weighed heavier than the others hidden in Livia's small hoard, not for its worth, but for what it carried. The truth of two women's lives colliding, so different and yet bound by the same invisible net. She thought of that net now. The Matronas, swathed in dignity and duty, walking within gilded cages built by Rome's laws, and women like her, sold into shadow, chained to a different but no less merciless order. Rome's cage was vast, Livia reflected, stretching high and low, gilded and grim, yet always locked. Her fingers found the hem of her dress, picking absently at a loose thread. She thought of her coins hidden beneath the straw in her cubiculum. They were small, pitiful against the city's weight, but when she closed her eyes, she could almost feel them lifting her, giving her a fragile promise of escape. Not yet, perhaps not soon, but the thought itself was something to hold on to. Her gaze followed the vendors setting up along the street. Men unrolled mats of cloth, women stacked clay cups and bowls. The smell of fresh bread began to rise from a distant stall. The city was stretching its limbs, shrugging off the night, and with it came the reminder that she, too, would have to rise again. She pressed her cheek against her knee and allowed herself one deep, grounding breath. Another day, she thought. I'm still here. The words had no triumph, only endurance, yet endurance was its own kind of victory. For a moment, the quiet almost felt like peace. The light touched her face, warm despite its weakness, and she let herself lean into it, eyes half closed. Her body sagged, yet something within her straightened. Hollow, yes, but unbroken. When the sun finally cleared the rooftops, the city erupted into sound. Wheels clattering over stone, a dog barking, vendors shouting the first prices of the day. The fragile calm shattered, replaced by the hammering pulse of life. With a sigh, Livia pushed herself to her feet. The step beneath her had grown warm where she'd sat, and she let her palm rest against it one last time before turning back toward the open door. From within, a faint scent wafted out, resin and spice, incense burning. The shrine was waiting. She stepped back inside, the world of Rome falling away as the shadows reclaimed her. The small shrine of Venus stood in its corner, half hidden by smoke and shadow. At its base, fresh offerings had been laid out, a scattering of rose petals, their color fading in the lamplight, a shallow cup of wine, red and glistening, and 3 ripe figs placed carefully before the goddess's feet. The gesture was unmistakably Vibia's, her touch always careful, her devotion unshaken even in this house where piety and survival often blurred. Livia paused before the altar, her eyes tracing the curve of the petals. She saw more than ritual in them. She saw Vibia's trembling hands, her rounded belly carried beneath the folds of her dress, the unspoken fear of what it meant to bring a child into this world. Livia's chest tightened, and for a moment she let the silence deepen, broken only by the faint crackle of incense. She stepped closer, the floor cool beneath her bare feet. She's praying for more than herself, Livia thought, gazing at the figs. Each fruit seemed a plea. For safe birth, for strength, for the child's breath to come easy. Livia bent her head, not in deference to the goddess alone, but in recognition of the woman who had laid them there. Her own hand moved slowly, plucking a stray petal that had fallen to the floor. She placed it gently beside the others, her lips parting to form a whisper. Not a prayer polished by ritual, but something raw. For her. For me. For all of us. The words caught in her throat. Venus, goddess of love, of beauty, of want. The Romans called her many things. But here, in this dim corner of the lupanar, Livia thought of her differently. Not as a goddess of comfort, but as a goddess of hunger, always demanding, never yielding. Venus of want. She let the thought rest in her chest like a stone. Then, with a faint smile tugging against the weight in her eyes, she murmured aloud, "Venus better listen today." Behind her, a voice answered, low but fierce, "If not, I'll scream louder." Livia turned, and there was Vibia, standing in the doorway with her chin lifted despite the shadow of fatigue beneath her eyes. Her hand pressed lightly to her belly, almost unconsciously, and her lips curved into a defiant grin. For a heartbeat, they regarded one another, two women bound not by choice but by circumstance, sharing something stronger than kinship. A soft laugh escaped Livia's lips. Then perhaps she'll have no choice. Vibia's grin widened, and with it, the heaviness in the shrine seemed to lift. For all the sorrow steeped in that place, there was also resilience, stubborn and unyielding. From the atrium beyond, a sudden shout rang out, Vibia's own voice, loud and triumphant, a sound that carried like a victory cry. It startled the quiet, broke the heaviness, and for a fleeting instant, Livia felt the stirrings of joy echo in her chest. She cast one last glance at the altar, at the offerings shimmering in the wavering light. Then she turned toward the sound, her bare feet carrying her away from the solemn shrine into the brighter noise of life. The incense smoke curled behind her, a lingering reminder that the goddess was always watching, or perhaps always waiting. The atrium was alive with noise the moment Livia stepped out from the shrine. The smell of incense still clung to her hair, but it was swept aside by the sound of laughter, raucous, unrestrained, echoing against the plastered walls. At the center of it all stood Vibia. Her cheeks glowed with victory, her eyes bright with the kind of mischief that was almost childlike. In her hand she brandished a small leather pouch, its weight evident from the way it sagged against the string. She waved it high as if it were a general's prize seized in battle. "Took a broken stool," she shouted above the cackles, "but he paid." The women around her howled with laughter, doubling over, slapping their thighs, clutching at their sides. Even those too tired to rise from their couches tilted their heads back and joined in. The lupanar had known weeping, bitterness, and silence, but when Vibia told a story, it knew triumph. She launched into her tale, mimicking the gruff sailor who had refused to hand over his coin. Her voice deepened comically, her stance widened, fists clenched at her hips. "No, no," he said, "you're not worth the price." She paused, narrowing her eyes, then lifted the pouch again. "And yet here it is." The room erupted once more. Someone called out, "Tell us how, Vibia. Tell us how you broke him." Vibia did not hesitate. She held her belly with one hand, the pouch with the other, and spun the tale with relish. "I warned him, once, twice. Then I grabbed the nearest stool, cracked it against the floor till splinters flew, and I told him, either the coin or the stool meets your skull." A chorus of gasps, then fresh peals of laughter followed. One of the older women clapped her hands together until her bracelets jingled, crying, "By the gods, you should have aimed already." From the corner, Livia leaned against a pillar, her arms folded, a small smile tugging at her lips. She let the others have their mirth, soaking in the noise like a warmth that reached deep into her tired bones. Finally, as the laughter waned just enough, she raised her voice dry and measured. "Next time," she said, "aim for his head." The timing was perfect. The room broke into roars again, some women doubling over on the couches, others pounding the walls in delight. Vibia herself tilted her head back and laughed so loudly that her voice rang clear into the upper rooms. It was more than humor. It was survival dressed in laughter. Every coin had to be fought for, bargained, dragged from the tight fists of reluctant men. They all knew it. They all bore the same bruises, carried the same weariness. In their world, persistence was not just a virtue, it was life itself. Fighting for every coin was as natural as breathing. Livia clutched her pouch close to her chest, as if it were a newborn. "This one," she declared, "will buy figs for the week, and wine enough for all of us." Cheers followed, voices colliding in a chaos of approval. Cups were raised, even if some held nothing more than water. For this brief moment, they were not workers bound by stone walls and routine. They were comrades who had tasted a small, necessary victory. Livia let herself laugh softly, though hers was quieter than the rest. The mirth around her was contagious, but her thoughts drifted elsewhere, toward the day ahead, toward the hours yet to survive. She straightened slowly, pulling herself away from the pillar, and the noise began to dim behind her. The others could keep celebrating. For Livia, the moment had been enough. She turned back toward her room, her bare feet light against the floor, her body already shifting into the rhythm of morning. The coins, the laughter, the fight, they would go on. But for her, it was time to prepare for the day's demands. And as she slipped into the quiet of her chamber, the sound of Livia's triumphant laughter still echoed faintly, like a shield against the world outside. The small chamber smelled faintly of lamp oil and crushed roses, the same mixture Livia had known for years. She sat cross-legged on the low couch, a worn box of pigments open beside her. Across from her perched the new girl, narrow shoulders drawn in, hands clutched to her lap as though the gesture might make her disappear. Aya. That was the name she had whispered when asked, her voice lilting strangely, carrying the sharp consonants of the north. Her hair, a pale red like embers turned to ash, tumbled loose around her face. Her skin was so fair it looked almost translucent in the dim light, marked here and there by freckles. She could not have seen more than 16 summers. "They said," Aya began haltingly, "that I would work in a bathhouse, to clean, to carry water." Her lips trembled as she spoke. Not this." Livia dipped her fingers into the rouge, then tilted the girl's chin upward with gentle firmness. "They lied," she said, her tone flat, practiced. She dabbed color onto the pale cheeks, softening the ghostliness of the skin. "They always do. You will learn fast, or you will leave. There is no middle." Aya blinked hard, as though holding back tears. The silence between them was fragile, broken only by the sound of Livia's steady movements. The brush against lips, the smoothing of hair, the adjustment of the tunic's neckline. She worked quickly, but not without care. "You mustn't look afraid," Livia continued, her voice low. "They smell it. Men are like hounds. They chase weakness." She pressed a bit of coal to the girl's eyelids, darkening the softness of her gaze. "Here, you wear a mask, not the truth." Aya's hands twisted in her lap. "But I have nowhere else. They sold me when no one wanted me at home." The words landed like stones, familiar and heavy. Livia did not flinch. She had heard them in 100 variations, from girls brought in from across seas and provinces. Rome had long hands, and they reached far for what they wanted. In the end, all of them were the same. Rome's stolen daughters, torn from their soil and replanted in stone courtyards like these. "You'll survive," Livia said finally, smoothing down Aya's hair and tucking a strand behind her ear. "Not because it is easy, but because you must." Aya's eyes, wide and damp, searched her face for something, comfort perhaps or hope. Livia gave neither, only steadiness. That at least could be offered. She rose and extended her hand. "Come, you've met me. Now you'll meet Drusilla. She'll tell you the rules and she will not repeat them twice." Aya hesitated, then stood, clinging to the edge of her tunic as though it might shield her. Together, they stepped out into the corridor, the air thick with incense and the faint sound of laughter still echoing from the atrium. Drusilla was waiting by the stairwell, arms folded, her expression sharp as ever. Livia guided Aya forward, then stepped aside, the quiet mentor yielding to the stern overseer. Her work with the girl was done, For now. Livia turned back toward her chamber, the echo of Aya's tremulous words trailing behind her. The girl's fear lingered like smoke, settling into Livia's chest. She closed the door softly behind her, leaning for a moment against the wood. Another daughter stolen, another mask painted, another day. The air of the lupanar was always thick by midday, oil lamps burning too hot in the narrow corridors, perfumes mingling with the cloying sweetness of spilled wine. But today, to Livia, it felt heavier still. She leaned against the rough plaster wall outside one of the smaller rooms, listening to the muffled sounds within. Aya's voice carried through the thin wood of the door, wavering at first. She tried to sound light, practiced, the way Livia had coached her that morning. But the tremor was there, undeniable. "Welcome. Please sit," the girl managed, her words uneven, marked by the accent of gall. The man inside laughed, his voice young, brash, full of the careless bravado of someone who thought himself charming. The air reeked of cologne even through the cracks in the door, too much of it, musky and bitter, as though he had bathed in the stuff. Livia folded her arms, jaw tight. She told herself she was only here to make sure Drusilla didn't have to clean up a mess later. But in truth, she could not bring herself to walk away. Every girl had a first, and it was always the worst. She still remembered her own. The sweat, the choking perfume, the laughter that had stuck to her skin for weeks. Inside, the bed creaked. Aya's voice rose again, softer this time. Not crying, not pleading, just uncertain. Livia's fingers drummed against her arm as she strained to hear. If the man grew rough, she would step in. Rules or no rules, Drusilla could curse her later. But then came a different sound. Aya's small laugh. Awkward, forced, but there. The client chuckled in return, boasting about his voyages, how the sea loved him more than women ever could. Livia rolled her eyes at the wall. A sailor then. They always spoke too much when they were young. Minutes dragged like hours. The muffled voices shifted from tense to subdued. The creaking slowed, then stilled. Silence. Livia straightened, bracing herself. The door opened with a groan, and Aya stepped out. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair disheveled, but her eyes, though wide, were dry. She held a bronze coin in her hand, gripping it so tightly that the imprint cut into her skin. Livia met her gaze. "You did fine," she said quietly. "Keep your chin up." Aya swallowed hard, standing straighter though her hands still shook. "I didn't break," she whispered back, her voice fierce despite the tremor. The words carried a weight far larger than the coin she held. For all her fear, she had endured, and that was something. The first swim in Rome's current was always brutal, cold, thrashing, a threat of drowning at every turn. Yet the girl had surfaced. Livia placed a hand briefly on her shoulder, steadying. She remembered the same look on countless girls before, relief mingled with exhaustion, the desperate pride of survival. One night would not make Aya safe, but it proved she could endure another. That, for now, was enough. The corridor filled again with voices, laughter from the atrium, footsteps passing on the stairs. Life in the lupanar moved on, unbothered by victories or losses that felt monumental only to those who bore them. Livia turned, guiding Aya back toward the central room. "Go breathe," she told her. "Eat something before Drusilla sets you to work again." When the girl disappeared down the hall, Livia slipped away to the kitchen corner. She sat with a small bowl of olives and bread, tearing the crust slowly. Vibia plopped down beside her, grinning with grease still on her lips. "First one survive?" Vibia asked. Livia gave the barest of nods, chewing thoughtfully. "She'll manage." And for a fleeting moment, the food tasted less bitter. Survival had its small victories. The midday heat pressed down on the lupanar like a heavy cloak, but in the small patch of shade behind the building, Livia and Vibia had carved out a moment of quiet. They sat on the worn back step, bowls of barley gruel balanced in their laps. The food was plain, gruel thickened with scraps of onion, salty from yesterday's broth. But hunger softened its edges. Livia slurped noisily, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Better than nothing," she muttered, before flashing Livia a grin, though I swear Drusilla waters it down every time. Livia stirred her portion slowly, watching steam curl into the afternoon air. If she didn't, you'd still complain. "True," Livia admitted cheerfully, chewing another mouthful. She leaned back against the stone wall, the sun catching in the loose strands of her hair. "Speaking of complaints, heard we've got a registry check this week." Livia's spoon paused midair. "Already? They came not long ago." Apparently Rome's fine men need to make sure we're still who we said we were, as if a name on a wax tablet changes a thing." Livia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Registry. Just another tax, that's all." Livia gave a faint snort of agreement. "Keeps us legal, not safe." For a moment, neither spoke. The scrape of spoons on clay bowls filled the silence, punctuated by the distant noise of clients in the atrium, voices rising and falling like restless waves. The registry had always unsettled Livia. It was supposed to be Rome's promise of order, names listed, occupations recorded, fees collected. A prostitute with her name on the registry was a recognized worker, not a runaway slave or outlaw. In theory, it offered protection. In truth, it was nothing but Rome's paper shield, thin, brittle, useless when it came to the real dangers. A man's temper, a soldier's fist, a client who chose violence over coin. No tablet or tax record could guard against those. She remembered the clerk who had written her name down years ago. He hadn't looked her in the eye, hadn't cared whether she lived or starved. He'd only dipped his stylus, scratched her into Rome's records, and told her how much she owed. Safety had cost her money, and even then, it had never truly come. Livia broke her thoughts with another scoff. "I say we tell them we've all gone blind, then what will they write on their little scrolls?" Livia almost smiled. Livia's humor was often crude, but it kept the bitterness from swallowing them whole. "They'd still find a way to charge us," she said. The women finished their bowls in silence, letting the sun warm their backs. For a moment, the world felt slowed. Two women eating together, sharing gruel, leaning on each other's presence more than the food. But the reprieve didn't last. A sharp rap echoed from the front, 3 knocks, deliberate and heavy. A client. Livia groaned. "There's your cue." Livia set her empty bowl aside, the moment of peace evaporating as quickly as the steam from her gruel. She stood, brushed the dust from her tunic, and drew a slow breath. "Back to work," she murmured, stepping inside as the noise of the house rose to meet her. The knock at the door was different this time, measured, deliberate, lacking the casual impatience of a client. Livia already knew before Drusilla opened it that it would not be business. When the door swung wide, the figure waiting there confirmed her suspicion. A man in the uniform of the cohortes urbanae stepped into the atrium, his posture stiff, his gaze flickering nervously from one woman to the next. He looked far too young to be so uneasy, his armor well polished, his scrolls tucked under his arm, yet his hands fidgeted with the edge of his belt. "Registry inspection," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of official duty, but cracking faintly around the edges. Drusilla gave a long, theatrical sigh, gesturing for him to come in. "They eat our bread, they drink our wine, and still Rome sends boys with scrolls to count our names," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for everyone to hear. The inspector's ears flushed pink, but he pressed on. His gaze settled on Livia, who stood by the wall, arms crossed. "Your papers," he said, trying to sound firm. Livia raised a brow. "Papers? Hardly. Rome keeps us on wax, not parchment." Still, she fetched the small wax tablet from her chest box and handed it to him. The man studied it as though it might sprout thorns. His stylus tapped against the surface, confirming the scratches of her name, her status, her fee. She could see the discomfort in his jaw, the way his eyes refused to lift and meet hers. "You are Livia, registered under the edict of," he began. Yes, Livia cut him off with a wave of her hand. "Rome knows I sell my body, and I pay for the privilege of not being hauled to jail for it. The wax keeps me from arrest. That's all." The bluntness made the man's lips press tight. He cleared his throat, standing a little straighter. "The registry exists for your protection. It ensures order." Livia laughed. Low, sharp, humorless. "Order? Is that what you call it? A chain disguised as a contract. You and I both know if a man beats me bloody tonight, no wax tablet will stop him." Her words hung in the air, heavier than the summer heat. The inspector shifted his weight, as though the truth in her tone threatened to crack his official mask. For a brief second, he looked less like an officer and more like a boy sent on errands he did not believe in. He handed back the tablet. "Your status is in order," he said finally, though the words sounded hollow. Livia slid the tablet back into its box, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. "Then we're done here." He gave a stiff nod, retreating toward the door with visible relief. Drusilla smirked as he left, calling after him, "Send Rome our regards, and next time, bring wine instead of wax." The atrium echoed with the women's laughter, but Livia did not join them. Instead, she slipped back toward her small room, the tablet still cool in her hand. She thought of how easily Rome claimed ownership with a few scratches of a stylus, how it wrapped women like her in laws that promised protection, but delivered nothing. She placed the tablet down carefully, as if it were both worthless and too dangerous to discard. Aya's frightened face flashed in her mind, the new girl clutching her coin after her first client, believing survival was something she could buy. "Paper shields," Livia whispered to herself, shaking her head. Then she closed the box and sat on her bed, letting the silence settle. When the murmurs of the atrium softened between clients, Livia slipped away from the bench and made her way toward the small cubiculum where Aya usually perched. The girl was there indeed, seated on the edge of the narrow bed, her hands fiddling with something small and glinting. At first, Livia thought it was a coin, but when Aya lifted her chin with a grin that seemed both nervous and proud, the shine caught the lamplight, bronze hoops dangling from her ears. They were too large for her delicate face, clumsy even, but the pride in her expression made them appear like golden treasures. "Where did you get those?" Livia asked, narrowing her eyes. Aya straightened her back, like a soldier reporting victory. "Found them in the laundry basket. Someone's client must have left them behind. Their loss, my gain." She reached up and touched the hoops, as if confirming they were really hers. Livia crossed her arms, half scowl, half smile. "Hide those earrings or Drusilla will take your ears too." Aya's grin widened, the mischief glowing in her eyes. "Worth it." The answer startled a laugh out of Livia. She hadn't expected defiance from this girl, not so soon. Only a few days ago, Aya had trembled like a bird held too tight. Now, she sat before her, balancing pride and danger with a daring tilt of her chin. "You think jewelry makes you a woman of Rome?" Livia asked, arching a brow. "It makes me not just another face," Aya shot back. "Everyone here looks the same, painted, powdered, waiting. At least this, it's mine." Her words struck Livia with a curious weight. She recognized the impulse, the desperate need to carve out something of one's own in a house that swallowed identities whole. Aya was learning quickly, and in her own way, perhaps too quickly. "Careful," Livia said, softening her voice now. She sat on the bed beside her, the straw mattress crunching beneath them. "Rome is a city that notices nothing, and yet takes everything. Those hoops won't save you if you stumble, but they will mark you, make you stand out. Sometimes standing out draws claws." Aya lowered her gaze for a moment, tracing the circle of one earring with her fingertip. "I don't want to vanish here," she whispered. Livia placed a hand over hers, steady and warm. "Then don't vanish. But don't be reckless either. Claiming yourself in this place is like planting a flag in a storm. Hold fast, but choose your ground. For a moment, the room was quiet, except for the hum of voices from the hall. Aya looked at Livia, her smile smaller now but steadier. "I didn't break," she said, repeating the words she'd spoken after her first client, this time with more conviction. "No," Livia agreed, squeezing her hand. "You didn't. And maybe you won't." The girl's eyes gleamed with cautious optimism, the bronze hoop swinging lightly as she lifted her head higher. In that small, defiant act, Livia saw the first hints of resilience taking root. A knock at the atrium door broke the moment, brisk, unmistakable. Another client arriving, another wave of the endless tide. Livia stood, giving Aya's shoulder a reassuring pat. "Keep the earrings," she said with a wry smile. "But for the God's sake, don't let Drusilla see them." Aya laughed softly, tugging her hair forward to hide the glint. "I'll manage." With that, Livia turned back toward the front, drawing in a slow breath as she prepared to face the next round of work. The scent arrived before the woman did. Roses, dense and heavy, as if a whole garden had been crushed into oil and poured over her veil. Livia noticed the fragrance drifting into the atrium, cutting through the usual haze of sweat, wine, and incense. Moments later, a figure stepped hesitantly inside. A matrona, cloaked in deep blue, her face shadowed by the fall of linen that disguised more than it revealed. Livia studied her quietly. These women never came without reason. Curiosity was too costly, too dangerous. Desire made them bold. The woman lowered herself onto the bench across from Livia, hands folded so tightly her knuckles whitened. For a moment she said nothing. Then, in a voice brittle but urgent, she asked, "What does he want?" Her words hung between them, raw and almost desperate. Livia tilted her head, weighing how to answer. This was not a question about flesh. It was about distance, a hollow widening between husband and wife that neither roses nor silks could bridge. Livia leaned forward, her voice calm but edged with honesty. "You're asking the wrong thing. Stop chasing his want. Stop being his fantasy." She let the words sharpen, cutting through the veil of fear in the woman's eyes. "Make him earn yours." The matrona's breath caught audibly. She glanced down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. Livia saw the tremor there, but also a flicker of recognition, the sting of truth that no perfumed veil could soften. "But if I withhold," the woman began, her voice faltering. "You'll wither," Livia interrupted, her tone still blunt, yet not without empathy. "Don't shrink yourself into the shape of this house. Don't mimic us. Take what is yours. Speak it. Demand it. Rome taught you to be silent. Let him be the one who listens." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Outside, laughter and dice clattered from the hallway, but here the air felt heavier, closer, as though the chamber itself leaned in to hear. The woman's eyes glistened faintly in the lamplight. She reached into her cloak and drew something wrapped in cloth. Without a word, she placed it on the bench between them and pushed it toward Livia. Livia unfolded the cloth slowly. Inside was a polished silver mirror, its surface gleaming like still water. She understood at once. This was no payment for flesh, but a gift for truth, a token of self-reflection, of seeing oneself clearly. The woman stood, her veil shifting as she rose. "I will try," she whispered, more to herself than to Livia. Then, without another glance, she moved back into the night, her rose perfume trailing behind like a fading memory. Livia held the mirror for a moment, catching her own reflection in its brightness. The face that looked back was both familiar and strange, lined with exhaustion, sharpened by survival, yet undeniably her own. She closed the cloth over it quickly, as though afraid the others might see, and slipped it beneath a folded blanket near her couch. Brothels, she thought, were more than flesh markets. They were shadow salons of secrets, places where the city's women came to ask what Rome itself never dared answer. A sudden burst of laughter rolled in from the atrium, followed by the rattling of dice on wood. The world of the lupanar surged back into focus. Rising, Livia smoothed her dress, tucked the mirror deeper into its hiding place, and stepped out to join the others, where the games of chance and flesh spun endlessly on. The evening unfolded as it always did, not with ceremony, but with the clatter of dice and the echo of women's laughter bouncing off plastered walls. In the atrium, a circle had formed around a chipped wooden board, the cubes tumbling across it in quick succession. Each throw was punctuated by groans, cheers, and the teasing cries of women who had learned to wring joy from whatever scraps of chance the night offered. "His snoring shook the walls," Livia exclaimed, slapping her thigh as the others erupted. "Better than his poetry," Livia replied, her voice dry, which only made the circle laugh louder. A few clients lingered, half drunk and already fading, their heads sagging against benches, their snores blending with the chatter. The women were merciless in their commentary, turning every story into a joke at some man's expense. A drunken collapse became a performance. A crooked sandal, left behind, was paraded like a trophy. The air hummed with energy, brightened by the ease of shared survival. Livia watched from the edge, leaning against a column. She was present, but not absorbed, letting the rhythm wash over her without fully joining in. The dice clattered, the voices rose and fell, and for a moment the brothel was not a cage but a hearth, a place where warmth, however rough, could flicker to life. Her eyes swept the room. Aya sat cross-legged near the circle, more confident now, shouting her bets with reckless abandon. Drusilla barked with laughter, her bangles jangling as she pounded the floor for emphasis. Even the youngest girl, timid only days ago, giggled from the safety of the group's edge. The lupanar was weary flesh by day, but by night it breathed differently. An odd, fractured kind of family. Still, Livia's distance remained. She smiled at Vibia's joke, smirked at Drusilla's theatrics, but her laughter never reached her chest. To her, these evenings were like a play repeated endlessly, familiar, almost comforting, yet drained of surprise. She was both actress and audience, her body in the scene but her spirit already leaning toward silence. As the circle's energy swelled, she rose and moved quietly toward the small household shrine tucked into a corner. The niche was simple. A clay figure of Venus, a few wilted flowers, a stub of candle hardened against the stone. She struck flint, lit a thin stick of incense, and watched as the smoke curled upward, softening the sharp edges of laughter behind her. The act was neither worship nor rebellion. It was rhythm, as much a part of the evening as the dice. A breath of stillness, a reminder that even here, within the painted walls of Rome's hidden hearths, women carved out spaces of their own making. Livia closed her eyes briefly, letting the incense sting her nostrils. Her prayer was not words, but something quieter, a wish for endurance, for Aya's safety, for the strength to meet another dawn without breaking. When she turned back, the circle was still roaring, dice scattering across the board, coins clinking as bets were paid. The women looked the same as always, faces bright in the lamplight, voices carrying against the stone. Yet from where Livia stood, it all felt at once tender and distant. She withdrew from the shrine, slipping past the laughter without interrupting it, and made her way to her room. Her body ached with fatigue, her mind dulled by the day's burdens. As the door closed behind her, the noise faded to a muffled hum, leaving only the weight of exhaustion and the faint trail of incense lingering in her hair. The signs had been creeping in for weeks, little things that could be dismissed if one wished. The way Vibia's hand lingered across her stomach when she thought no one was watching. The faint swelling beneath her tunic, hidden well enough under folds of cloth, but more stubborn now, refusing disguise. Tonight, as she bent before the shrine of Venus, it could not be ignored. Her offering was not the casual toss of petals or the careless laugh of dice won. She knelt with a gravity that drew the eye, laying down a sprig of rosemary and a scrap of ribbon, her lips moving in fierce silence. Her body trembled slightly, as though the act of prayer was as urgent as breath. Livia, watching from across the atrium, felt her chest tighten. She had seen that posture before, the desperation of women bargaining with gods for mercy. In the lupanar, mercy was scarce, and pregnancy was no miracle but a storm. Too many women had carried life only to watch it extinguished, whether by fate, by violence, or by choice made under duress. Rome's cruel lottery for women spared few. She did not speak. To name it aloud would be to invite Drusilla's sharp eyes or the madam's cold calculations. Instead, she lowered her gaze, letting the secret breathe in silence. Vibia's belly was her own story, her own risk. Words could not shield her, they could only expose. And yet, Livia could not turn away. She moved closer to the shrine, her steps soft so as not to intrude. When Vibia finally rose, wiping her eyes quickly with the back of her hand, their eyes met only for an instant. In that glance was everything: fear, shame, defiance, and a plea for understanding. Livia said nothing. She only reached into the fold of her garment and pulled out a single coin, dull bronze, worn smooth by countless hands. She placed it on the ledge beside Vibia's ribbon, letting it rest there without explanation. Her prayer was wordless, her lips shaping only one thought as the incense curled upward. Venus, don't abandon her. Not now. The silence between them was heavier than any spoken vow. Vibia gave a faint nod, almost imperceptible, before slipping back toward the others. The laughter of dice and stories swallowed her, but her shoulders sagged with a weight none of the others noticed. Livia remained by the shrine for a moment longer, her hand brushing against the clay figure of the goddess. The surface was cracked, stained by years of smoke and wax, yet it stood still, a small, stubborn symbol. She wondered if that was what Vibia needed most, not salvation, but endurance. In the quiet recess of her thoughts, Livia knew what awaited Vibia if the truth could not be hidden. The midwives of the lupanar were no healers, only women with rough hands and herbs that cut as sharply as knives. Men did not pay for swollen bellies, they turned away from them. For women like Vibia, pregnancy was not a promise of future. It was a narrowing of doors, a tightening of chains. But tonight, at least Livia had offered solidarity. No questions, no judgment. Just a coin, a prayer, and the knowledge that Vibia was not wholly alone. The incense was nearly ash when a sharp knock echoed through the atrium. A client's voice, slurred but insistent, carried through the wooden door. The rhythm of the lupanar shifted again, laughter dimming, footsteps quickening as another night's business pressed in. Livia drew one last breath of the smoke before turning away. The prayer remained unspoken on her tongue, but it lingered as she stepped toward the call of work, her heart heavy with the secret she would carry in silence. By the time the lamps had burned low and the incense at the shrine had long since died to gray ash, the lupanar shifted into its final rhythm of the night. The dice games were abandoned, the laughter thinned, and in its place came the staggering weight of late-night visitors, men reeking of wine, sweat, and half-forgotten boasts. These were not the careful patrons of the early evening, eager to impress with coins or compliments. These were Rome's shadows seeking oblivion. They came in groups, loud and clumsy, their sandals dragging across the stone. One leaned too heavily against the wall, leaving a smear of oil from his tunic. Another shouted for Vibia, slurring her name as though it were a battle cry. The brothel doors did not close to such men. Their money, though carelessly spent, was still money. Livia stepped into their orbit with the ease of long practice, her body moving before her spirit could catch up. She smiled as though their stumbling jokes amused her, fluttered her fingers across an arm or shoulder, and guided them toward the alcoves with a dancer's precision. Her words came quick and sweet, her tone light, but the truth was bone-deep fatigue. Every step ached, every laugh was brittle. "Make it quick, hero," she murmured to one, whose eyes struggled to focus as he fumbled with his belt. The words carried a teasing lilt, but inside her mind the phrase repeated with sharper edges, "Just one more." Just one more. Coins clinked against her palm, damp with sweat. She tucked them away without looking, the movement swift, mechanical. Charm was armor here, performance a weapon. She let the men believe her laughter was real, her touches eager, while her mind floated above the moment, detached. This was endurance, nothing more. The hours dragged like lead, each encounter blurring into the next. By the time the last client staggered away, collapsing against the atrium's column with a grunt, the air itself felt thick with exhaustion. The women exchanged brief glances, their painted faces smeared, their smiles long since faded. There was no talk left, only the sound of sandals retreating into the night. Livia's body trembled as she pulled herself back to her small cot. The mattress was thin, the wool blanket rough, but to her it was sanctuary enough. She collapsed onto it with a groan, her bones sinking into the hollowed fabric. Her hands moved by instinct, loosening her garments, smoothing her hair back from her damp forehead. Only then did she draw out her earnings from the night. The coins spilled into her lap, their dull glimmer a reminder of what the performance had cost. She counted slowly, lips pressing into a thin line at the total. Survival measured in bronze and silver. Never enough, but always something. As she gathered them back into her pouch, she noticed Aya lingering in the shadows of the atrium. The girl's eyes were sharp despite the hour, watching the tally with quiet hunger. Livia paused, her fingers curling protectively over the small pile before offering the faintest of nods. Tomorrow, perhaps, they would speak. Tonight, silence was the only mercy. The brothel settled into stillness, broken only by a snore echoing from one of the rooms. Livia turned onto her side, the coins pressed cold against her palm, her body aching, but her eyes already drifting closed. The night had taken its toll, but she had endured. The lamps still smoked from the night before, their oil nearly spent, when Aya emerged from her alcove. Her steps were unsteady, her face pale but set with determination. She held her hands clasped tightly before her, as though keeping herself from trembling. Her eyes found Livia across the atrium, searching for an anchor. "Do I look ready?" she asked, her voice thin, uncertain. Livia studied her. Aya's hair was in disarray, her lips colorless, her cheeks drawn tight from the night's ordeal. There was bravery in her posture, but it was the kind that frayed at the edges. Livia rose slowly, exhaustion tugging at her bones, and motioned the girl to sit. "No one is," she said, her tone even, practical. "But you fake it until even you believe it." From her small box of powders and paints, Livia drew out the worn stick of rouge. With practiced fingers, she dabbed a hint of red onto Aya's cheeks, softening the pallor. Then she reached for a shard of charcoal, pressing it gently along Aya's eyelids. The strokes were careful, precise, turning the frightened wideness of the girl's gaze into something more deliberate, more alluring. "Hold still," Livia murmured. "Makeup is armor. Men will think it is for them, but it's really for us." Aya blinked, uncertain, then allowed a shy smile to touch her lips. "Does it work?" "It works because we decide it does," Livia replied, stepping back to survey her handiwork. "You paint courage on top of despair until the mask feels like skin." Aya shifted, fingers brushing her rouged cheeks. Her curiosity broke through the fear. "Is it true? When a woman earns enough for wigs, that means she has made it?" The question startled Livia, and for the first time that morning she let out a laugh, dry but not unkind. "Wigs? Gods, girl. Wigs are just another mask. Some use them to show they're wanted, others to hide what the knights have stolen. Don't measure yourself in horsehair." The girl flushed, embarrassed, but Livia placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Measure yourself in survival. In how many mornings you can still stand and ask, 'Do I look ready?' That is success here." The words seemed to steady Aya. Her chin lifted slightly, her shoulders straightening beneath the threadbare tunic. She looked into the small bronze mirror Livia held up for her, the painted face staring back more composed than the trembling girl within. "Better," Livia said, tucking away the powders. "Now go rest. You'll need it." Aya hesitated, then whispered, "Thank you." It was soft, but filled with something fragile. Trust, maybe, or the first thread of belonging. Livia only nodded. She had heard those words before, from others who had come trembling and hopeful, many of whom were no longer there. Gratitude was fleeting in this place. Still, she allowed herself the faint warmth of having given what she could. As Aya retreated toward her room, the atrium grew quiet again. The women were scattered in uneasy sleep, their laughter from the night gone to ash. Livia tidied the paints, her hands moving with ritual care. She rubbed the last smudge of rouge from her fingertips and rose. The morning light crept thinly through the shutters, signaling another day's beginning. Livia stretched her aching limbs, drawing in a steady breath. Whatever waited, she would face it as she always had. Painted, prepared, unbroken. The sun had barely risen when the first knocks came at the door. Rome's streets were alive with workers rushing to their posts. Bakers, smiths, water carriers, all men with little time and fewer coins. Some stopped at the lupanar before their labors began, craving a brief escape before the hammer, the fire, or the endless march of orders consumed them. Livia was ready. Not eager, not even alert, just present. Her body moved with the same mechanical rhythm as the oil lamps being snuffed out above the atrium. One client after another, a man whose tunic still smelled of flour, another with hands rough from the forge, each wordless, efficient, seeking only release before the city claimed them. They came quickly. They left quicker. Routine steadied her. She barely noticed her own movements, her mind drifting above the bed like smoke. Coins clinked into her box, each one proof of survival, nothing more. Then came one who broke the monotony. He entered with swagger, drenched in a pungent cologne that announced him before he even spoke. Livia coughed discreetly, resisting the urge to wave the air. "Nice scent," she muttered dryly as he fumbled with his belt. "Did you bathe in it?" He grinned, missing the edge in her tone. "Imported oil," he boasted. "Expensive. Worth every denarius." "Smells like ambition," she thought, watching him pose as though he were a fresco come to life, one arm raised in what must have been his idea of heroic display. But his stomach sagged, his balance faltered, and the effect was more comic than commanding. She smirked despite herself, her exhaustion cracking just enough to let humor in. It was a small mercy, laughter found in the absurdity of men trying to play gods in a room that stripped them back down to flesh. When he was gone, leaving behind his cologne like a fog, Livia shook her head. These moments, fleeting, ridiculous, were what kept her sane. Survival was the dance, and they were all stepping to Rome's relentless rhythm, some with grace, others tripping over their own pride. By mid-morning, her muscles ached, her hair clung damply to her forehead, and her lips felt numb from forced smiles. Yet the coins piled steadily, dull bronze and silver catching what little light seeped through the shutters. Efficiency was its own kind of shield. The less she felt, the more she endured. When the last of the morning's clients slipped away, Livia pulled her tunic straight and sat down at the small table tucked against the atrium wall. The house was quieter now, the women stirring slowly back to life. Livia appeared from the corridor, her steps slower, her hand brushing unconsciously against her belly. Livia pushed a plate of bread toward her, the crust torn but edible. Their eyes met across the table, not with words, but with the weight of what they both carried into each day. For now, the clients were gone, the morning's routine complete. There was bread, there was breath, and for a moment, there was the faintest possibility of rest. By midday, the house had settled into a rare hush. The street outside still thrummed with footsteps and vendors' cries, but inside the lupanar, there was a pause, like the house itself exhaled between one tide of men and the next. Livia found her way to the small courtyard, where a sliver of sunlight cut across the paving stones. Livia was already there, perched on the worn bench, slicing an apple with her thumb, pressing carefully into its skin. Livia sat beside her, accepting a wedge without ceremony. The fruit was tart, its sweetness edged with sour, but it was food that filled the silence. "Claudia's stealing my coins," Livia muttered after a moment, her jaw tight as she bit into her slice. Livia chewed slowly, not rushing her answer. Rivalries in the lupanar were constant, like rats in the walls, unseen at times, but always gnawing. "Let her," she said finally, flicking her crumbs to the floor. "We're all scraping. She's not stealing your men, only chasing the same ones." Livia snorted. "Easy for you to say. The men come for you without even calling your name." Livia smirked at that, though it was more weariness than vanity. For now, men change their appetites faster than emperors change their wives. She leaned back, watching the patch of sunlight inch along the wall. But Livia wasn't soothed. "She undercuts me, asks half my price just to pull them from my door. How am I supposed to keep up with that? What's left for me?" The question hung in the air, sharp and personal. Livia felt its sting because she had asked it herself many times, though not aloud. Survival here wasn't only about pleasing clients. It was about maintaining a fragile balance, navigating jealousies, whisper campaigns, and the house's invisible ranking. "Keep your head," she said softly. "Don't chase her race. Men smell desperation, and they'll use it against you. Better to stay still and let her burn herself out." Livia looked down at her apple core, as if seeking an answer in its pale flesh. "So we're meant to just wait for each other to fall?" "That's the trade," Livia said, her voice hardening. "Empires built on door frames, each of us guarding our little patch of wood, praying no one stronger comes to claim it." It was a bitter truth, but truths here rarely tasted sweet. They sat in silence for a moment, the courtyard filling with the rustle of leaves from the lone fig tree and the distant laughter of a child from the street beyond the wall. The contrast only deepened the tension. They were comrades in misery, yet always competitors too. Livia sighed, her hand drifting again to her stomach, half hidden beneath her tunic. "I don't want to fight, Claudia. I don't even have the strength." Livia turned her head, studying her. There it was again. The quiet weight of what Livia carried, the thing no rivalry could erase. For a fleeting moment, Livia felt protective rather than competitive. "Then don't fight her," she said gently. "Save your strength for what matters." The sound of soft footsteps broke their quiet. Aya appeared in the courtyard, her hair still disheveled from her chamber, her face searching for reassurance. She paused, hesitant, as if interrupting something she couldn't quite name. Livia straightened quickly, tucking her core into the basket at her side, her complaint vanishing behind a mask. Livia, however, leaned forward, her gaze shifting to the younger girl. Lunch was over. The rhythms of rivalry and reflection dissolved into something else, another responsibility, another reminder of survival in its newest form. The afternoon sun dipped low, washing the lupanar's walls in gold, softening the grime that clung to its stones. In that light, Aya appeared in the doorway of the courtyard, no longer the trembling shadow who had first crossed it. Her chin lifted a little higher now, her shoulders squared, and most striking of all, small bronze earrings dangled from her ears. They were mismatched, clearly stolen or borrowed, but they caught the light as if they belonged to her alone. Livia noticed immediately. She arched a brow, setting aside the comb she'd been running through her hair. "Well," she said, her voice teasing, "someone's decided to grow feathers." Aya flushed, but she did not look away. "Do they make me look better?" she asked, touching one earring with tentative pride. "Better?" Livia leaned back, studying her. "They make you look like you're trying not to drown, which," she added with a faint smile, "is already better than sinking." The words drew a shy laugh from Aya, her first in days. Livia felt a strange warmth at the sound. She remembered how the girl had clutched her blanket that first night, how her eyes had darted like a trapped bird's. Now she was claiming small pieces of space, earrings, posture, the attempt to smile, as if testing her right to exist within the house. "You're learning fast," Livia said more gently. "I'm trying not to drown," Aya answered, almost in a whisper. The honesty of it struck Livia harder than she expected. She reached out and touched Aya's chin, nudging it up slightly. "Then keep your head above the water. That's all any of us can do." The moment hung between them, fragile but hopeful. In Aya's eyes there was no triumph yet, but there was something like determination. Raw, unpolished, but real. Livia recognized it, the same stubbornness that had carried her through her own early days when fear had threatened to hollow her out. In the world of the lupanar, accessories were not merely decoration. A bangle, a hairpin, a pair of earrings. They were markers, signals of possession or defiance. Women here branded themselves not with iron, but with glittering fragments, little declarations of identity amid the sameness of walls and beds. Aya's earrings were no different. They were her way of carving out space in the shadows, saying without words, "I exist. I belong." "Keep them close," Livia murmured. "Not because they're pretty, but because they tell you who you are becoming." Aya's smile faltered into thoughtfulness, but she nodded, her fingers brushing the earrings as though they were talismans. The house stirred again, voices echoing in the hall, footsteps gathering as evening crept closer. The day's brief lull was ending. Livia stood, stretching, brushing dust from her skirt. She glanced once more at Aya, who was still standing a little taller, her earrings glinting defiantly in the dimming light. For the first time in a long while, Livia felt a thin thread of pride. Cautious, yes, but real. The girl was not safe, not yet steady, but she was fighting. And perhaps, in that fight, Livia saw a reflection of herself she had long since buried. "Come," she said, turning toward the stairs. "The night doesn't wait for us. Let's be ready before it swallows us whole." And with that she prepared herself for the evening, carrying with her the flicker of hope Aya had sparked. The night surrendered slowly, paling into a gray blue that softened the jagged rooftops of Pompeii. From the lupanar's step, Livia sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, watching as another dawn pressed itself upon the city. The cobbled street before her was still damp with shadows, but already there were signs of stirring. Vendors shuffling out to claim their corners, slaves dragging baskets of bread, the faint bray of a donkey echoing between the walls. The world was waking as it always did, indifferent to what had been endured within the brothel's rooms. She shifted, feeling the small pouch tucked beneath her sash. The coins inside were not heavy, but their presence pressed against her skin with a weight beyond metal. Each clink was a fragment of time sold, a measure of nights endured. She let her fingers rest on the hidden bulge, imagining for a moment that it might be enough to carry her away, past the gates, past the hills, to some nameless place where no one called her by price. But the fantasy dissolved as quickly as it came. She was still here. She would be here tomorrow. Escape was a dream she carried like a secret ember, glowing faintly but never catching flame. Her eyes followed the first streaks of gold spilling over the rooftops, turning the city's grime briefly radiant. Exhaustion gnawed at her bones, her muscles ached with the dull persistence of overuse. Yet beneath that heaviness was something harder, quieter, more enduring. She had not broken, not yet. The dawn was proof. Another night survived, another day begun. In her mind, she framed it as survival against Rome itself, the empire that demanded bodies and sweat, the hunger that never ended. The prostitutes of Pompeii were not only merchants of flesh, but dancers in an unending rhythm, spinning themselves into the city's pulse, whether they willed it or not. To endure was its own rebellion, a way of outlasting Rome's appetite. She thought of it like this: surviving Rome's hunger. The street grew busier as the sun climbed, voices layering into a chorus, barter, complaint, laughter, the sound of life beginning again. Livia listened, neither inside nor outside of it, a spectator perched between shadows and light. She closed her eyes briefly and told herself, "I'm still here. That's enough for now." The words were not triumphant, not even comforting, but steady. They held her upright when nothing else did. With a long breath, she rose from the step. The pouch of coins slid back into place against her hip, a promise for later, or perhaps for never. The house behind her exhaled the sour scent of stale wine and unwashed sheets. It was waiting, always waiting. She stepped inside. The corridors were quiet, the other women still sleeping, their rest as shallow as her own. She took up the broom leaning by the wall and began to sweep the stone floor, brushing away the night's remnants, the ashes, the dust, the faint trails of mud from clients' sandals. When the floor was cleared, she struck flint to light the small oil lamp in the corner. Its flame flickered, soft but insistent, casting the first glow into the brothel's dim heart. The day had begun again. The cycle had not broken, and neither had she. Livia's story is not hers alone. It belongs to all who rise each day beneath the weight of a world that never eases. Like her, we walk in circles, caught in cycles that test but do not break us. The question is never whether the dawn will come, but how we choose to face it. And so as her lamp flickers back to life, let us remember, endurance is its own quiet triumph. If you wish to gather once more around this fire of stories, to journey with us into the next tale, make sure to subscribe and return for the road ahead.